Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another week of your favorite NFL podcast, sweeping the charts. We are absolutely it's a ratings bonanza here over at the SAOC podcast here over the last couple of weeks. At least we like to think so. We don't really know what the numbers say, but we're going to pretend like this is the fastest rising NFL podcast out there on a weekly basis for the past year and a half. Boys, can you believe it? Neither can I. But in all seriousness, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. We are here for yet another week of a deliberation. Here we're talking NFL, this time a more grander scope, not just what is going on in the season. But before we get to that, of course, I am joined by always by this troublesome triumvirate that we are. Joining me on the top of the screen, the man, the myth, the Podfather. Podfather Rick. Rick, how we doing?
I'm looking across the street at the house that's across from me, and I'm seeing their Christmas decorations that are up. I don't recall there ever being a windmill near the nativity scene, but that might be a permanent installation in the house. But I don't know. I didn't realize Jesus was Dutch, but that's another conversation for another day. There. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at our pick challenge, and I'm seeing that I'm behind by 11 points because I'm seeing that someone had a perfect week last week, and I'm motivated. I am motivated more than ever. And then I look at my pool, and I see a lot of upsets, and I think I'm in trouble. So, but I'm good otherwise. It's great, having fun.
Hey, a man of honor is Rick because he will never go against the preseason selections that he made. That is the man that he says his word, he keeps his word. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking of that perfect week you just referenced to, well, let's go to the man who has the big smile on his face because after last season, there's still a month's worth of games left, but it looks like vindication is on the way. Our games master at the bottom of the screen, first place in the hashtag SAOC pick challenge, which I'm referencing that for a reason here early on, but first place in the challenge right now and first place in the show. He might be first place in everyone's hearts, Rick, when we do a likability rating of the show. I think he probably beats us both out. But Justin is there. Justin, how are we doing?
What could be bad, Another week of football. We got games on Saturday this week. I'm going into the week in first place. It's a good week.
It's a good week indeed. It's a good week indeed. He keeps it short and sweet because he's here to handle his business, as many would say. So
that's why everyone loves him, because he's short, sweet, and to the point. He's earnest in all his points, unlike you and I, who are two just loquacious blowhards. It makes sense.
It's so true. Also, someone make sure that loquacious blowhard is on my tombstone when the time comes in the future. I think that needs to be on there. I don't know who'd be in charge of that, but I think we need to try to add
Chisel that in there. Yep.
Oh, man. But no, in all seriousness, there's a reason why we're mentioning it off the top, ladies and gentlemen, because unlike most weeks, we are actually going to start this week. Well, I mean, the show has chaos in the name. We always have chaos sprinkled throughout the show. But we are going to be starting this with the utmost of chaos for the second time in podcast history. We're beginning the show with the hashtag SAOC Pick Challenge to begin the proceedings because, like Justin mentioned, we have games on Saturday. Which, by the way, Saturday games, that time of the season, huh, boys? This season has flown by fast. It is the last month of the season. Plenty for us to talk about. And it's a really good thing that we're going to be talking about something else because I think the last 3 weeks of the season is going to be the real time for us to really dive into these wild card races that are going on. Plenty of divisions still on the line. I think only one, maybe a second team, but I think only one team has definitively clinched their playoff spot up to this point in the season, which is just utterly absurd. This might be the latest in the last couple of years, I think, that we've had a team definitively clinch a playoff spot, and no one is even close to well, I shouldn't say no one's close because we might have a division clinched, I believe, this weekend. Sans that to be determined. But in all seriousness, we are getting straight to the point, I should say. We're going to be starting this episode with the hashtag SAOC Pick Challenge. We're going to talk about a little bit, a sprinkle of news that broke a couple days ago because, a Thursday night football game happened. And that's kind of all we could say for the most part in terms of that game. But it's more the fallout that we're going to be intrigued in talking about. And then after that, we are going to be talking about, as the title of this show demonstrates, the 25 Hall of Fame semifinalists that, from there, the voters, I don't know if they call themselves a committee, but the Hall of Fame committee is going to be selecting from that pool of 25, the 15 guys that will move on to the final round of voting that I believe gets officially announced when, Rick, at the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken.
So they'll go down to 15 probably within the next couple of weeks, and then they will announce the finalists, announce the Hall of Famers at the NFL Honors. They're on the Super Bowl, yeah. Very soon.
There we go. So, this is a quick process. So it's honestly perfect timing for us to be able to do this episode. And we are going to be looking at the list of 25, and our SAOC committee is going to pick our personal 15 guys that we would move on to become finalists for potentially being inducted in this next Hall of Fame class. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we've looked at the landscape of sports, and considering what other committees have done the last couple of weeks, I mean, who's to say we can't be a committee that has some, some legitimacy behind it. We might be the most legitimate committee that's made any choices over the last couple weeks for all we know. But with that being said, let's not waste any more time. We'll get to that later in the show. Let's start, as I've said, once again, the hashtag SAOC Pick Challenge, where on a weekly basis, ladies and gentlemen, if this is your first time joining us, first off, welcome. And second off, please stay. But in all seriousness, Rick, Justin, and I go throughout the slate of games in the NFL for a given week, and we pick games that we like on a points basis from 4 to 1, 4 being most confident, 1 being the least confidence we have. We can pick a tie if we do so choose, but that tie must automatically be selected with our first pick, our 4-point pick. But in accordance to that, we do get upgraded to a 5-point pick, so it can be valuable if used correctly. And I don't think anyone's ever made a proper tie yet. So, that could be history one day. But in all seriousness,
let's not talk about that jerk.
Let's not. I mean, we've all faltered at it at some points, to be fair.
No, you haven't. You haven't picked a tie yet. You can't
in my
speak
heart,
for that.
I've picked ties. Anyways, so we have that. We all 3 of us must also always pick an upset pick. The caveat with that is that the lowest it can be is with your 2-pointer. You are not allowed to pick a 1-pointer. Your first upset cannot be with your 1-point pick. If you do, there will be punishments. We don't know what the punishments are because we actually keep ourselves on our P's and Q's, and we make sure we help each other out. We make sure that we all get our upset in, because we don't cheat our way. We don't lie, cheat, or steal our way into the points here. Well, someone might be, but we like to think we're not cheating our way to the points this upcoming season, and in future renditions of the pick challenge as well. So with that being said, I think I've hit all of the finer points, except for the one last fact of the way that we decide who are favorites and who are underdogs is via our friends at
ESPN Bet.
Would have liked that a second sooner. But that being said, Rick, give us the standings breakdown of things.
You talk a big game for somebody who's so far behind everybody else,
Ooh.
Jurg. But before we get to that, there are actually 5 teams that can clinch a playoff berth this week. Well, 4 can. 1 can clinch the division. 2 of them are winning in, Dallas and Philadelphia. If they win their games, that's it. They're in. Baltimore and Detroit have to win and get help. And then San Fran, if they win or the Rams lose, they get the West. So that being said, after last week's wonderful games, wonderful for some people, someone. So our mascot went 1 for 2. So he's at 43 points, which is a saving grace to you, Jurg, because you did not have a good week again, I think, for the second straight week in a row. I believe you only had 1 point again.
And it's an NFC South team that I jeer that helped me out.
However, that does get you to the magic 69 points. So congratulations on that end there for you.
If we're being honest, I think I'm the real winner just because I properly hit that point mark this season.
Sure.
So
yes, of course. I am at 91 points, so I am there, but it is Justin's race to lose because of a perfect week last week. Justin, thankfully, I redid my calculations because I almost gave you 21 points for last week, which would have been nice. But of course you would have. But you were at 102 points. So you have broken the century mark first before everybody else. We have 4 weeks to go in this pick challenge, so there's still plenty of time. I think everybody, with the exception of the Pirate, is mathematically alive somehow, some way. But, we have a lot of games on the docket, and one of them starts in about 90 minutes, which is why we're doing this now. So, Jurg, it's your call to pick first.
Who am I going to jinx this week with my 4-point pick is what I'm wondering. If I'm going to have any hope whatsoever in trying to, because this is the funny part that Rick mentioned, I'm technically not mathematically eliminated from the win. If Justin somehow goes on a landslide in the bad way and I somehow get 4 perfect weeks in a row, there is a chance. That being said, I know that's not going to happen. It's like, so here's the comparison, because I'm bringing it back because it is the superior motorsport, Rick. Justin right now is kind of Max Verstappen. You're Checo, and I'm Lewis Hamilton trying to chase you for second place right now. And we'll see if you can barely hold on to it, just like Checo did this past 2023 campaign.
And we've lost our Southern United States viewership thanks to superior motorsport. So, great.
I mean, Texas, Florida, I think people are starting to like F1 more.
Yeah.
But as I bloviate, all the bloviation aside, it's 2 obvious picks, I think, here for my 4-point pick. I think you 2 know which 2 very obvious games I'm talking about. There's the team that is favored by double digits, and there's another team that in theory could be favored by double digits, but they're not. But after what has happened the last couple of weeks, you got to believe that there is a motivation game coming for them where they just might absolutely blow out their opponent. So it could go either way. Who am I jinxing this week, ladies and gentlemen? I'll tell you who I'm jinxing. I'm sorry, San Francisco, but you were my good luck charm last season. I'm going to try to go with you again this time around. So give me the San Francisco 49ers for my 4-point pick.
which if they do win that game, gives them the NFC West as the division. So, I'm tempted here to go with a nice 4-point upset because according to the lines on ESPN Bet, this is an upset. But I do believe that this team will get this win in a win and in scenario here. So I will take them. Give me the Cowboys over the Bills at 4. The Bills played great last week, but there's still something off about them. Meanwhile, the Cowboys just looked phenomenal against the Eagles. And so I think that continues because I think this is the real Dallas team that really can challenge for the NFC East crown. So I will take them as my 4-point pick here to try and cement an early spot and also take my upset off the board very early. So, which again, it's 2.5 points.
Yeah.
I get it because Buffalo's oddly up and up, but Dallas is just too good. Give them the win.
Yeah, and not just competing for the NFC crown right now, Rick. Also, low-key, just the first seed in the NFC, because if San Fran hypothetically falters here within the last 4 weeks of the season and Dallas can stay undefeated, you're talking about a Dallas Cowboys team that's going to be the first seed in the NFC, I think, for the second time in the Dak Prescott era, because I remember, I think, one of his first 2 or 3 seasons they got it, and they tragically lost to the Packers in the playoffs. But Aaron Rodgers ain't in the NFC anymore, so maybe that'll be the case.
That happens. So Justin has back-to-back picks here, and I'm trying to gauge, but Justin's got a very poker face. I'm trying to gauge whether he's upset that those 2 picks are off the board, or whether he's confident that there's a third one there that he was going to take regardless. So,
I think he has 2 games that he's about to take back-to-back that he's more than fine with.
I mean, look, it's early. It's usually a little bit more difficult later on when you pick your 1 and 2 point picks, because then the games are all gone. I'm gonna say that I would have liked to pick the Niners because I've been riding high on them lately. I think I got them the last 3 weeks in a row. I got to pick Niners games.
I believe so, yeah.
So, that's been good. But you know what? I'm gonna start out with what should be an easy game, and I'm going to pick the Philadelphia Eagles. The Seahawks are on their way down. The Eagles also seem to be on their way down, but they've had a much tougher schedule lately. I think the Eagles will come out here. I'm not sure if Geno Smith is playing this week.
I don't think he is. I don't think he is.
So yeah, I'm going to take the Eagles. I think this is a get right game for them. We'll see what they do Monday night. And for the first time in a long while, I'm going to pick a 1:00 game, guys. I'm going to pick the Chiefs over the Patriots.
And that was the other game I was referring to that I was very much heavily thinking about for my 4-pointer, because
something about that Chiefs offense and the Patriots defense struggles me, but I don't think the Patriots are going to be able to score on that team either, because the Chiefs defense is much better this year than it has been in the last few years.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's a good pick too, because I think the Chiefs, they need this for a get right game. And I sent you guys in our chat that their last 4 games are going to be against all backup quarterbacks. So if you can't beat Bailey Zappi or Easton Stick or Aiden O'Connell or whoever it is, I mean, I get the Raiders scored 63 this a couple nights ago, but not against the Chiefs defense. So the reason why we did this was because we were talking about that there's 3 games on Saturday. 1 is in 90 minutes. And I think I said, I wonder which one of us is going to be the one that's going to pick one of these early games. Well, it's going to be me, because I, for some reason, love the Jake Browning story. I really think it's a very, very interesting one. And honestly, Minnesota's in flux right now. They're going to Nick Mullins. Justin Jefferson's not fully healthy. They don't have a lot of good offensive options. I think Madison's still hurt. So Ty Chandler's going to be their RB1 for them. Give me the Bengals. I mean, listen, if the Bengals somehow continue this run and they surprise everyone and get into the playoffs with Jake Browning as their backup quarterback, you got to think Zach Taylor is in line for very heavy coach of the year consideration. I mean, there's a lot of great coaches that are out there this year, but I will take the Bengals in 90 minutes to beat the Vikings and get me 3 points on the board.
That's not a bad one right there, because it's a Minnesota team that after the beginning of the honeymoon phase, you could say, for Josh Dobbs, it's over for him this season.
The passionate came crashing back to earth.
Yes. And I'm not going to say it sucks to say, because it was a good little story for a while, but in all seriousness, we probably figured this was going to happen at some point.
Yeah, we did.
So it was a good little run, but I don't blame you, because, Jake Browning's looking good, and finally Zach Taylor's getting a couple wins, because I think before these last couple performances here by Browning and the Bengals, Zach Taylor's career without Burrow as the quarterback was 4-28-1 or something like that. Like, it wasn't
good.
it was like historically awful.
Wasn't good.
So we'll see right there. And this is critical for both these teams. You know, you're going to get the best of both of them in theory because like wild card position is on line for both of these teams. So there's that. All right, let me move. And who am I going to be selecting with my 3-point pick? This
Pick
is
'em.
tough.
Pick 'em. I know what that face means.
Do you?
I know what that face means.
Do you?
You're thinking Titans over Texans.
I actually wasn't.
No. But it's probably a good choice, though, because Davis Mills is the starting QB for Houston this week.
I mean, old long neck Mills has had a couple games in his career here and there. You never know, Rick.
He has.
No, I was actually thinking of another team because, you know, as as awful as this division is, someone at some point needs to end up winning the NFC South, unfortunately. And if I'm looking at the board here in terms of teams that I think could end up winning the NFC South, there's a team that has a really good shot here with the opponent they're facing. So give me, again, I can't believe I'm saying this, give me the Atlanta Falcons actually with my 3-point pick here. Look, let's be real. Justin, this hurts you and me the most because we were like so hopeful for Carolina going into the season, but it's clearly been all for naught. It's just been a struggle this entire time. And I don't think there's any reason whatsoever to believe that they are going to go anything like at best, they might finish 2-15. And that is a literal at best scenario. And I don't even know if that's going to happen because, and this is why I'm actually going to pick the Falcons here for my 3-point. Because remember, they've been my 1-point pick recently. Justin, does it surprise you just as much as me that actually Arthur Smith using Kyle Pitts for a legitimate downfield play, and he's actually sort of been using Bijan Robinson? Again, sort of. I stress sort of. It hasn't been for a whole game. But he's actually looking at his weapons and he's like, you know what? Maybe I should use them.
I don't know, man. It doesn't make any sense. They spent all of these first-round picks on these guys, and they're doing okay. But like,
they could be better. That's the thing.
They're not being targeted. They're clearly not in the game plan. And that's where the issue is with Arthur Smith. I mean, they've got players. They're staying in games defensively. Of course, they could use some help with the quarterback. But it's just, there's something, I don't know. It's got to be a game plan, right?
Well, here's the thing, because think about it. Arthur Smith believes in an offense that has a couple of decoys in it. And like at least one or two, whether it be maybe his running back as the decoy or his tight end as the decoy. What I don't understand is that you're not hampered with talent to be doing that kind of game plan. You have a first-round pick, a high first-round pick in Kyle Pitts, a high first-round pick in Drake London, a high first-round pick in Bijan Robinson. You have these guys who all very much first-round pedigree. Like, there's no reason to not be using them more consistently. The reason why I'm kind of like, I say it as like touch-and-go joke, but also like some seriousness, is because Kyle Pitts having back-to-back games here the last 2 weeks of 50 receiving yards or more. I know that doesn't really sound like a lot, but that sort of is a lot for the Arthur Smith game plan, right? Like, that's actually, I think, might be the first time this season or the first time since early in the season where Kyle Pitts had the back-to-back 50-yard games. And even though Bijan didn't necessarily have a great game against Tampa last week, he did have a rushing touchdown. And then the previous weeks before that, you're talking about 91 yards against the Saints, 95 yards and a touchdown against the Arizona Cardinals. Like, it's highly touch and go. I don't understand why they haven't been using him way more, because we've seen Bijan is the kind of talent that should be getting more touches and more production, and he only has 2 games over 100 yards, like rushing at this point in the season. Probably yards from scrimmage, I think he might be fine, because in those 90-yard games I just mentioned, he did get over 100 as a whole. But I think, again, this is more so how bad the Panthers are, and I think like there's no reason the Falcons in a very tightly contested NFC South race, this needs to be the must-win for them. If they don't win this one, chop his head off at the guillotine at this point, because there's no excuse to lose this. So, yeah, give me the Falcons with my 3-point pick, Rick. Okay. And then with my 2-point upset here, despite what Rick might be thinking, no, I'm not picking Houston with my 2-point upset, as tempting as it might be. Give me with my 2-pointer here. See, there's not a lot of games. I feel like if I would have considered a better upset, it would have been earlier. And I did want to pick one of these games today, and I might still do that with my 1-pointer, but I don't necessarily know if I want to pick them for my 2-point upset, because, I mean, we spoke about this, last week, I think? Really down on the Steelers right now. They need to show us something this week, because this is a hot Colts team, offensive-wise, and this is a downtrodden Steelers team that is starting to get injuries on the defense, which is the strength of this unit. So for my 2-point upset pick, I can't believe I'm doing this. Boys, give me the Paisan himself. Give me the Giants with my 2-point upset pick.
I like it. I like it a lot. And listen, he had a mistake-free game last week on Monday Night Football, and he had that final drive that was perfect if you're a Giants fan because it started off with the Barkley fumble, but they came back. They did everything they needed to do. He found his guys in space. And, I think Wan'Dale Robinson had the greatest tackle in that game of his own guy. So, that's kind of ironic there.
Well, I'm also picking this because think about it, the Giants' defense is actually starting to play a little bit better. Who would have thought that a defense that's not out on the field 80% of the game would actually be able to play good?
Yeah.
But also look at the Saints. Derek Carr is clearly playing hurt.
Yeah.
Everything I've ever criticized him for on the show, and trust me, I don't walk any of it back. I think we can clearly tell he's not 100% right now. And the choices are a completely injured Derek Carr who cannot hit his guys on certain possessions for the life of him. Or a Jameis Winston, who we know famous Jameis's turnover bakery. He's going to throw 2 or 3 if he gets in there. So
yeah,
it's this is a real chance for the Giants here. Who's we're talking about mathematical probabilities, Rick. The Giants are technically still in the wild card hunt, and if we expect certain teams to take a step back in terms of win-loss record this week, which we already are because you picked the Bengals over the Vikings.
Yep,
this is actually a really important week for the Giants here.
Very important week for the Giants, and I think that's why. And again, New Orleans has been disappointing, but to your point about Atlanta, they're still in the hunt. New Orleans, Tampa, and Atlanta are all in the hunt for that division, but the Falcons, I think, have the easiest game of the 3 because Tampa's got Green Bay. That the Packers are going to try and get back their dignity after being embarrassed because it wasn't so much that it was a close game. It was like the offense did not look very good at all. Even though Jordan Love had that touchdown at the very end, it was very lackluster. And then this game, the Saints haven't been the team that we've expected them to be. So I feel like that's kind of a given there. So I agree. I think it's a good one too. And I like personally, because I picked the Falcons to win the division this year. I like the fact that you picked them over your pick, the Panthers, because Carolina's rough. Carolina's rough this year.
The mark of a man is to accept when he's made a mistake. Unlike David Tepper, I can accept when a mistake has been made.
Yeah. So now I go to my 2-pointer here, and again, when you get to the 2 and the 1s, you're kind of playing with house money a bit, but this is kind of where you can get a little funky in some ways. And I think I'm going to get a little funky here because I want to play out a scenario. I mean, I understand I'm down by 11, but I'm confident in my 4 and my 3. I'm confident in Justin's 4 and his 3, but I'm looking at the games that are possible 2-pointers here, and I'm not touching any other side of that game because you're right. The Steelers-Colts game, not touching that. And also the Lions-Broncos game, I'm not touching that either because, I thought the Lions needed a bounce-back win last week, and they didn't get it because the Bears trounced them. And the Broncos are just hit or miss here. So I'm going to take a risk because you don't get anywhere in life without taking a risk here. I'm going to take a game in which, on paper, it looks like why are you taking this team to beat them? Why are you going this direction here? But one team's missing a lot of players, and there's that specter looming over this game that says that if and only if there's a win, then back he will come. And I hate to do this to myself, and I think Justin's knowing where I'm going to go here. It's going to be a shocker, but give me the Jets over the Dolphins at 2 points. Look, Miami is very banged up. Their offensive line is in a lot of flux. Jalen Phillips argued their best defensive player is off the field. They don't have a starting safety. They lost both their starting safeties to injury. Tyreek is questionable. He's questionable every week, but all it takes is one bad flop, and you got an issue here. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe, is this game in Miami or is this game at MetLife? It's in Miami, right?
Yeah, it's in Miami.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So, but again, you're talking about an injury-riddled season for everybody here. And, again, this is a Jets team that, can get to the quarterback. And it's a little tricky when, Teron Armstead didn't practice. You don't know if he's going to be fully ready to go. I think this is ripe. I mean, again, you're relying on Zach Wilson to play 2 great games in a row. to get you to that Washington game where maybe you'll have the one-handed leaping interception king Aaron Rodgers come back and be your starting quarterback. By the way, Rich Samini, what's that report all about? Like, come on, dude. Don't be ridiculous here. But let's see it. Let's see it happen. Again, there's not a lot of time, but there is a lot of time. So if I can keep pace, maybe sneak out a win here or there, I'll take it. So give me the Jets at 2 for Miami.
I don't blame you. I mean, like, and it's funny because I looked at it. I'm my 4, definitely not my 4. Scumbags they are. I was partially considering with my 3, but I'm just like, man, we've praised that Jets defense the last 2 seasons. This feels like the kind of game that this is a reeling Dolphins team. And let's not forget, you mentioned the banged up parts, and I know you mentioned, but I don't think it's I don't think we're being too repetitive with repeating this. Tyreek Hill being hurt, not 100% is big for this Dolphins team. That he's not the only weapon that's not feeling 100%. Jalen Waddle, we have seen this season like multiple times. He hasn't looked 100% out there. This is a dinged up Dolphins team that, forget just an opportunity for the Jets. This is an opportunity for the Bills here, where if they can get this upset, I know they're favored in the game, but if they could get this upset win over Dallas at home, they're right back there and trying to recapture this division. And like this is the kind of, this could be the kind of week that maybe, I'm not even joking, save Sean McDermott's tenure in Buffalo if things break right for him. So I don't blame the logic there.
Justin, as the resident Jets fan, I think either wasn't a fan of my pick or was wondering why I made the pick and is thinking, well, you just handed me the title, so that's fine. I can do whatever I want.
I think it's probably the latter two.
You learned? Don't you know the rules? You never bet on the Jets.
Justin, that's it. You never bet on your own team. That's why I didn't pick the Bears.
No, you don't bet in games that the Jets are participating in.
I'm not betting, though, so it's okay.
You're betting. You're betting points.
Points. What are points?
You don't bet on the Jets. You don't bet on Jet games. You don't. Because whatever you pick, they will do the opposite. As is evidence, I was so tempted to take the Texans last week. And I said, you don't bet on the Jets. And I was right. The Texans should have won that game by 30
Ironically, though, I had the Jets in my personal picks that week. So I could have taken them at 3 if I wanted to. But
before the season, I would have picked the Jets to win that game too.
But again, this is why when you get to the preseason picks, so that works out for you.
Anyways, I guess I got to take my upset pick now. And
you do.
I think you're right, Rick, about the Chiefs. I think that if they end up dropping this game, it becomes a major issue for them because there's a team nipping at their heels right now, guys. A team that is hot. They just had their win streak end. They have been very good, and they play a team that's been struggling a bit lately, especially the teams that can turn the ball over. And that team is the Detroit Lions. I think that the Denver Broncos go into Detroit, and they are going to win tonight to stay hot on the heels of a struggling Chiefs team.
It's, and honestly, it just continues that collapse narrative, and yet if you look at the rest, like the Packers' loss Monday night helped the Lions out significantly. The Vikings having so much turmoil is helping the Lions out significantly. So they can literally backwalk into the NFC North crown, which they didn't want to do. I believe it, but that's what's probably going to happen. So,
yeah, no, I don't blame the logic there. And you mentioned like this Lions team. I was kind of mentioning this with, I forget which set of games it was last. No, with the Jaguars, where man, the Jaguars got a little bit lucky last week with the way that results broke because they got extremely fortunate that they lost. Well, they didn't lose their quarterback, but obviously an injured Trevor Lawrence who they lose against the Browns. But both the Texans and the Colts dropped pivotal games that they could have had. It's a very similar situation happening in the NFC North right now, where the Lions. Maybe their best football doesn't need to be played right now for them to get their division. So
it doesn't, but I also believe that there's a case to be made for this is kind of it for Detroit because the free fall is happening for them, and if it continues, then again you're talking about their final 3 games being 2 against the Vikings, which will be for the division, and then that one in the middle against the Cowboys.
Yep,
and Dallas is firing all cylinders right now. So
and Detroit is not.
Detroit is not. But again, Vikings pull off a win here against the Bengals, they'll be 8-6. Lions, if they lose, will be 9-5. Doesn't take a mathematician to know that those two games will be very, very pivotal at the very end of the season. So I do like it though, Justin. So now we have our inconsequential 1-point pick.
My inconsequential 1-point pick is going to be pretty consequential for the team that I'm picking. And that is going to be a team that is finding themselves tied, losing the tiebreaker for a playoff spot, the 7th seed in the NFC. I'm going to go with the Los Angeles Rams. Team that's starting to get healthy, a team that's offense is starting to pick up a little bit. If they can, get their receivers healthy again and Stafford playing well, this team can sneak into the playoffs. And I got news for you. They're not a bad team. They're only 2 years removed from a Super Bowl and still have a lot of that core left.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good one. That's a very good pick there for sure. I think that's and again, I mean, the Rams are fighting really hard. And you're going up against a Commanders team that, let's be honest here, they're just waiting for the end of the season because it's not ideal for Washington. They're waiting for a change. Like I think we all understand Ron Rivera is probably done, and now is what I honestly I'm thinking about this now. How bad do you feel for Jacoby Brissett? I mean, yes, he's making a lot of money, but like all these other backup quarterbacks are getting on the field, and he's a guy who started for Cleveland last year, and Sam Howell's playing good in some games, playing terrible in others, and Brissett's never going to see the field this year until maybe week 18, if that. So,
well, honestly, no. I think Howell will probably even play week 18 because at the end of the day, like if you're Washington, even if you don't get a high enough pick this year potentially, you still need to have the proper evaluation process of who Sam Howell is, and like as much as it might, like, obviously it sucks for Jacoby Brissett because he's a competitor. He's a very vocal leader in every single locker room he's been in, right? Like, this goes back to his Colts days when he had to take over the ship for Andrew Luck. This is just one of those cases where it's like, he's just going to have to sit because they, like, unlike a lot of other teams here where it's like, oh, you want to protect your investment for next season or whatever. I think you need a full 17-game season to properly have a legitimate sample size of, all right, who is Sam Howell for our organization?
Yeah.
Do we take a risk in this upcoming draft on who our next quarterback is, or do we wait a year, maybe see what the 2025 prospect pool is more so like? Let other teams take risks at QBs, and let's settle with the fact that maybe we can clean up some things from Sam's game. He puts up the counting numbers. We're talking about the counting numbers. Sam Howell's pretty good. But when I think you start to go deeper, I think there are things where it's like the coaching needs to make the impact. And I think the coaching that makes the impact is a coaching change in Washington that we've been expecting kind of since last year. And we see what a full year of a new head coach. And I'm not saying a name because I think we all know who the next head coach of Washington is going to be. A full season under a new regime is going to really dictate what the future of Sam Howell in Washington is going to hold for all of us.
Yeah. And I think this game just really shows the Rams are kind of back in a way. I think last year was a bit of an aberration for them because, again, Kupp was out, Stafford was out, their running game wasn't really there. Kyron Williams has been playing great this year for them in the backfield. So that's really a big help for them too. At one point, as you know, I always say 1-point games. What do they mean? But this game got to 1, and I think it's interesting that it got to 1 because if you look at it, yes, it's a very difficult battle, but at the same time, there's kind of a lean here. And I think the lean is towards the team that has really been playing very, very well. And, they got lucky last week. They got very lucky for a nice pick 6 punt return touchdown to walk it off.
But taking my pick away from me.
But Jared, get over 70 points, then we'll talk. But then at the same time, you got to think that this is a game where if everything breaks right for them, they will go 2 games up for the 1 seed in the AFC. And the AFC title game will not run through Chiefs Kingdom, but through Ravens Row. Give me Baltimore over Jacksonville. 1 point.
It's a good one right there. Ravens Row.
Thank you. So now, Jared, just to highlight the picks you have left.
Yeah.
Indianapolis, Pittsburgh tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have 3 games in the 1 o'clock hour on Sunday, which are Cleveland, Chicago, Tennessee, Houston, it's there for you, and Green Bay, Tampa. The Battle of the Bays.
Oh, Lord. I don't like any of those games. Good God.
I mean, I think there's one obvious one. I think there is.
Hold on. This isn't my official pick, but if I say it, is this the obvious one you're thinking of?
Tell it to me.
Is it the Browns? Is that who your obvious one is?
I think it's obvious.
Okay. No, that's who I was leaning towards, but I'm like, is there a game I should be watching out for here? No, I'll stick with that. I'll go with the Browns because they were, of those four remaining, they were always, because to me, as good as the Bears are starting to look the last couple weeks, they've got a couple upsets. You got to give them a lot of credit for these upset wins that they're getting. I think this is the best defense they're facing over the last couple of weeks.
I agree with you.
Like, if you're Chicago, like, it's nice to see some of the winning, but let's be honest. This coaching staff is not going to be there for long. This quarterback is not going to be there for long. Like, I'm not saying like they're going to lose this game on purpose, but like the magic stops at some point. It's probably going to stop here. So it is the Browns game to have. So give me the Browns with my 1 point pick.
Again, I thought it was the obvious one. I mean, yes, the Bears have been playing a lot better, but we all also again see the light at the end of the tunnel where Eberflus is going to get fired. So we're just going to have to roll with it. And this Browns defense is good. And Joe Flacco has the Angels' wonder has just turned into another stellar performance. So, got to give him something there.
Got to have that conversation. Is he elite?
Well, we'll see. So those are our picks for the humanoids. I have logged the picks for our mascot, who once again is not here. He's now sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa instead. So he's the most inconsequential and lackadaisical mascot we've ever had because he barely shows up for a show nowadays, but neither here nor there. So his picks are going to be the Colts over the Steelers at 3, the upset pick of Tampa Bay over Green Bay at 2, and then Tennessee, just to break your heart, Jerg, over Houston at 1, because he, in his mind, in his words, if I have a chance, I got to hit Jerg where it hurts. So Titans over the Texans. So
when General Davis leads a victory, I don't want to hear it.
To recap our picks, Justin with 102 points going into this week, firmly in first place, goes with the Eagles over the Seahawks in the Battle of the Birds at 4. The Chiefs over the Patriots at 3. So interestingly, you picked the game that was flexed into Monday night and the game that was flexed out of Monday night at 3 points.
That's all right.
Your 2-point upset is Denver over Detroit, and your 1-point pick is the Rams over the Commanders. Myself at 91, needing a little bit of luck here and there. I will take the Cowboys over the Bills at 4. The Bengals over the Vikings at 3. So I'll be watching that game in about an hour while we're talking about our Hall of Fame picks. The Jets over the Dolphins at 2. So I have a 4-point upset and a 2-point upset. And then the Ravens over the Jaguars at 1. Jerk, needing a wing, a prayer, some fairy god dust, and everything else that you could possibly think of, goes Niners over Cardinals at 4. Falcons over Panthers at 3. Tommy DeVito and the Giants over the Saints at 2 in your upset pick, and the Browns over the Bears at 1. And if you need to know the Pirates picks, just go back about 30 seconds. There you go.
Yeah.
So
that ends this week's edition of the #SAOC Pick Challenge, ladies and gentlemen. But it's not the end of the show. If you are just joining us and you missed the entire spiel, we are starting with the Pick Challenge this week because we have Saturday games. It's about that time. Speaking of it's about that time, some news has broken earlier this week, ladies and gentlemen, that this show predicted from a mile away. We knew it was happening in what has been quite the season for this gentleman. There's been ups and downs, unexpected things to happen, but the earth-shaking decision was finally made. Teddy Bridgewater is going to be retiring from the NFL. The former first-round pick for the Minnesota Vikings. A solid career for him overall. No, in all seriousness, let's move on to the actual story here. But that being said, salute to Teddy Bridgewater. A pretty good career, all things considered, after he got injured. The fact he was still able to come in and play relatively decently in certain stretches of time, he deserves it.
It's a shame because we'll never know how good that career could have been.
Yeah,
it's a shame.
He was good at protecting the ball. He didn't make too many mistakes. Like, he improved in terms of decision maker, and his knee just gets absolutely torn to shreds. And it goes from there. And shout out to the Minnesota Vikings. They didn't even consider cutting him at any point during that time when they could have. So you got to give props to the organization for keeping him on both seasons when he was hurt. Shout out to the Jets for temporarily having him before sending him to the Saints. I guess the last good thing Sean Payton did for a quarterback before this season was helping Teddy Bridgewater look like himself again. Parlayed that into a Carolina contract, which he then went over to Denver. And I would like to say Teddy Bridgewater better than Russell Wilson as a Denver QB in their careers because same amount of playoff appearances, and Teddy's just way more likable. So that being said, congratulations, Teddy Bridgewater. Good career. That being said, someone who we're not going to say has had a good career up to this point, the now former head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, Brandon Staley. Boys, oh boys, Thursday Night Football was an ugly affair, to say the very least. The Las Vegas Raiders and the LA Chargers played a game. And it's actually funny because I wasn't aware of this until like earlier in the week that, or even just before the game, that the Raiders and Chargers tend to like, go back and forth between games here, funny enough, in terms of like sharing wins. Like they're pretty competitive with one another. I think every the AFC West team, sans the Chiefs and insert name of team here, tends to be competitive within like multiple seasons across from one another in terms of splitting games. But the Raiders just destroyed the Chargers. And it was funny considering 4 days before that, the Raiders were on a short week here. They lost 3-0 to the Minnesota Vikings. And what did they do to make up for that? The Raiders scored 21 points in the first quarter, and they scored 21 points in the second quarter. The Chargers on the game only scored 21 points, and the Raiders scored 21 points in the half. It's very telling that you could either isolate the first quarter, the second quarter, or the second half as a whole for the Raiders, and they equaled the Chargers. That just goes to show that you were not just, you were outmanned, outplayed, outgained, out everything. And clearly, for Chargers ownership, the Spanos family, it was time for them to out the guys that just were not able to get the job done in Los Angeles. And that wasn't just the head coach, Brandon Staley. That was also the general manager, Tom Telesco, who had, I think, close to a decade run, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe just under it, but basically a decade run, which is nowadays is kind of rare in if you go across the leagues. General managers, not all of them get a decade run with a team, but Tom Telesco was able to do so. Had a couple head coaches believe that Brendan Staley was going to be the guy, and it just did not work out that way. So after a 63-21 just destruction of the team, the Raiders ended up winning. Justin, I'm going to throw it to you first. Fallout of this decision and how the Chargers are going to end off this season. We know they're going to end off on losing, but what can the Chargers do to have any sort of hope and semblance for 2024?
Well, they could do their due diligence and hire the right personnel. And now I don't want to say that Telesco or Allen were not Allen. I don't want to say these guys weren't the right guys, but things clearly did not work out towards the end. They lost the locker room. They were bringing in superstar players left and right, and yet guys were performing and they were still losing games. It's going to be interesting to see how they proceed. I believe Keenan Allen is on a restructured deal. Austin Eckler is a free agent after this year. The offense is going to look very different. Mike Williams had yet another season-ending injury, so we're going to have to see how that goes. There is a ton of question marks for a team that just signed a quarterback to such a hefty deal. Don't get me wrong, he deserved that deal, but you don't know what's going to happen now. I mean, they were the worst passing defense in the league, and they gave up all these points so quickly to a team that scored 0 points the week before. They got to go out, they got to find the right GM, and then they have to hopefully trust that GM to make the right hirings and hire the right coach. That's the only way to start.
Rick, we commented this about Chargers the entire time of the preseason. This is a team that just pure talent-wise, can compete with the best in the AFC. But just something unravels every single season. And this may be the worst version of the Chargers chargering in an extremely long time. Because it has resulted in this wholesale purge of general manager gone, head coach gone. And if Herbert had actually waited to signing his contract up until the offseason and he saw how bad this was, I think he'd be demanding a trade. Because I think he has every right to question what the heck is going to happen now. Like it's like Justin said, like you got to hope you hire the right people. But I think it's more than just hiring the right people. You got to hire someone that understands how to build and get rid of a toxic culture. And I'm not saying toxic like there are guys there that are a problem. I'm saying just it doesn't matter what iteration of the Chargers we see every single year. They find a way to lose. And I find it very apropos that Brendan Staley, I'm not going to say the first major gaffe, but the for end of season gaffe that he committed 2 years ago, calling a timeout against the Raiders, where a tie could have brought both of them into the playoffs. Now, 2 years later, the Raiders are the team that ends his Chargers coaching tenure. How do you find any solace in the future if you're a Chargers fan at this point?
Well, I think the solace in the future is going to come with the fact that you do have Justin Herbert long term, so that at least you have that position settled. I think you have to try and see if you can make Quentin Johnston better, because he has had a significantly rough first year because the drops have just been cataclysmic at best. You have to reinvent yourself in a way. If you're the Chargers, you have to reinvent what you were doing, because again, bringing in all these stars didn't work and hasn't worked. They brought in J.C. Jackson to kind of be the cornerstone of the secondary, and as you mentioned, they were the worst passing defense in the league, so much so that they actually released J.C. Jackson because he wasn't helping. And you feel for this team because there are decent pieces on there aside from Justin Herbert. Like you mentioned the wide receivers that are there who are, going under, their contract renewals and all of that. Well, they also have a couple other good pieces on the offense too. I mean, he's not Antonio Gates, but Gerald Everett's had a pretty solid season for them as their tight end. I mean, you hope that Donald Parham can kind of recapture form when he's fully healthy and everything. But it's also a team that, let's be honest here, Joey Bosa's hurt. So there's a really big piece that you lost this season to your defense. And while Khalil Mack has had a stellar season, he's one guy, and one guy cannot carry this team. He cannot go out there and defend passes like he can stop a rush or sack the quarterback. So this offseason, you have to try and find role players to build around the cogs that you have. And you're right. I think this is kind of, the problem with long-term contracts. When you see one guy get a long-term deal, your immediate thought is, I want that deal too. So when, Hurts got his long-term deal and Burrow got his long-term deal, we were all kind of sitting back saying, well, Justin Herbert's next, right? And maybe that was the case, but looking back at it now, I think you're right. I think there is some buyer's remorse on the Herbert side of the camp because, what do you do now? Even if you go out and get the right coach, this is a team that has not had playoff success. I'm not even counting Phillip Rivers because they never made it to a Super Bowl with Phillip Rivers, which is stunning to say because Rivers is one of the better quarterbacks in that run. They have not had playoff success since Stan Humphries led them to a Super Bowl in 1995 when it was a joke that they were even there. This is the franchise that had Junior Seau, that had LaDainian Tomlinson, that was a couple kicks away here and there from making it to Super Bowl in the mid-2000s. They were fighting with the big boys. They were fighting with the Patriots and the Steelers and the Colts for relevancy and supremacy because Marty Schottenheimer had this franchise in a good spot. They're not there right now. And, I think it's interesting that one of the big things that came out of this was, Kellen Moore is going to be the interim head coach. He didn't want it because he does not want his future head coaching opportunities to be ruined by a bad stint as the interim. What do you think that says? I think to me that says that Kellen Moore is one and done with the Chargers. Right. He's going to be a guy who's going to look for and possibly get a head coach opening somewhere down the line. Maybe he wants to go to Carolina and try his hand with Bryce Young. He's better than Chris Tabor. But the fact of the matter is that this is the Chargers team that the fall has been so swifter than we ever realized that it was going to be. Yep. Because this is a team that we were ticketing for 10, 11, 12 wins year in and year out. Years past, some of us have even said they were going to be the team that was going to knock out the Chiefs and knock them down from their run. I believe last year I had them at 16-1, and that was a bust. I believe this year, I'm not pointing fingers, but I believe one of us had them winning the division this year. All it is it's just conjecture, and it really shows you that this team was not ready. And they're not going to be ready in this current iteration. So when they have a top 15 pick, you got to hit on it. You have got to hit on it. That's the ultimate goal here.
Yeah, and it's gonna be a busy offseason for whoever is going to be coming in and being the new general manager, because there's a lot to go here. From graphics that I saw earlier this week, the Chargers' projected cap space, they are currently $34.8 million over the cap for next season, the second fewest amount of cap space that any team has. So they're very much in the red. It's the second worst cap situation that any team in the league has. In case anyone was wondering, yes, the Saints are first because, the sins of the past, they do come up in the present and your future. But the Chargers have the second worst cap situation here, and they're going to have to make some big decisions in terms of if there's a chance to extend and restructure certain guys, because $38.5 million and $34.7 million. Those are the respective cap hits of Khalil Mack of the 38.5 and of Keenan Allen of the 34.7. And you mentioned it, Rick. Those are two guys that without them, whatever hope you had this season would be even less if you got rid of them. So it's going to be tough to get rid of them. But it's also Keenan Allen at the age of 32 next season. And Khalil Mack is going to be 33 next season, which, by the way, I do want to give the shout out to Khalil Mack, who you mentioned. 15 sacks this season, tying a career high, has a chance to not only set a new career high, but he is at career 99.5 sacks. His former Defensive Player of the Year I think he will be getting a new accolade for him with the 100 sacks on his career. He's actually also tied for first in forced fumbles. So congratulations for Khalil Mack for having a very Defensive Player of the Year caliber season, but it's not talked about enough because of A, the Chargers, and B, the other guys who are around the league. No, it's like you two said, this needs to be a whole structure thing of figuring things out, and it starts with who is the head coach going to be. Like you said, Rick, I think Kellen Moore's probably out. I don't even think a new general manager is going to have to worry about selling a head coach on Kellen Moore, because like I said, I think Kellen Moore might be done with Los Angeles. Because again, I will say this, counting numbers wise, Herbert was fine this season. And I think if you're Kellen Moore, you can hang your hat on the fact that you work with Dak Prescott, you worked with Justin Herbert. You can sell that to a general manager / owner. And you mentioned, I think Carolina is going to be a primetime spot where they could be acquiring about his services here very soon. So I think that is likely going to be the case. Just so much that needs to be looked at here for the Chargers, and a team that, man, we could go through the list of the talent that have come in since that lone Super Bowl appearance. And this team is not starving for talent. They've had great players. They've had good players. They've had great players. They've had all-pro players. They've had Hall of Fame caliber / our Hall of Fame players throughout that team. You mentioned Junior Seau. You mentioned Phillip Rivers there, Rick. This is the same team that had LaDainian Tomlinson. They had Antonio Gates, who is going to be up for consideration here. And I think for all intents and purposes, obviously we need to let his career play out, but Herbert has at least the talent and the abilities of what someone who could and should be considered a Hall of Famer are. But time will tell if he's going to be able to get to that spot in his career, because you got to add the accolades and you got to have some success. And it's going to be very difficult to see what that is going to be like over the next couple seasons for the Chargers. So that being said, we'll wait to see. This is just an opening thing about it. Overall, maybe we could have more to comment about. I think ultimately we all agree Brendan Staley, extremely disappointing. I think he was the guy when he was first hired. I think everyone solemnly agreed was a really good choice for hiring. And you saw the mistakes pop up at the end of year one, and you thought, that's just something temporary. It's fine. Rookie head coach, growing pains, right? They got worse. Questionable fourth down calls here and there, always believing that they could go for it on fourth down, being saved on a couple of occasions because of either that defense overperforming or Herbert just absolutely keeping them and willing them to win games. And the luck ran out. And we just saw what happens if Herbert's not the guy there. It's not good. It's not good at all. So ultimately, if you're the Los Angeles Chargers, completely new situation is going to be there going forward. And I think that kind of has to be the case if we're being realistic. So that being said, we move on from that. And I mentioned the Hall of Famers before. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the main event of the show. It's time for what the show title is all about. The 25 Hall of Fame semifinalists for the NFL Hall of Fame. Now, let's say this on top of our bet. We believe all these men could potentially be in the Hall of Fame one day. It wouldn't surprise us if a vast majority of the men on this list will be in the Hall of Fame one day. But we are playing to the rules that the NFL sets out, where 15 of these gentlemen will be selected from this group of 25 finalists to be moving on. And then from that 15, another voting occurs for who's going to be fully enshrined and inducted into the Hall of Fame. We just want to put that out there in case people are like, who are these guys to decide who Hall of Famers are? And I'll tell you who we are. We are the sports agents of chaos, ladies and gentlemen. We are here to give you our 2023 not 2024, excuse me. I thought of this year, but 2024 Hall of Fame finalists. We're going to pick from this pool of 25 guys. We are going to, as a group, collectively decide who the 15 are that we think the voters/committee will put into the next round. So this is kind of our thoughts, but more you could lean towards prediction aspect of this is who we think they'll end up putting in. The way we're going to decide this, if all three of us agree on someone, we don't need to have too much conversation or ballyhoo. We're just going to move on, put them in. If only 2 out of 3 of us are in agreement, we will save that player for the end of the conversation, and then we will circle back if we have multiple guys that we need to push in on the list. So that's how it's going to work for the people wondering. So that being said, that's that portion of it. Rick, Justin, anything you gentlemen want to add about these proceedings before we get going?
So I think there's also one other thing that we just need to remind ourselves with. The 15 finalists that are here will get looped in with the 4 veterans committee and coach and owner finalists that are there. So it'll be a final 19. But it's really hard to kind of put those 4 guys into this run because their numbers are different and their careers are different. So and they're in for different reasons. So, someone might look at this list and say, well, you put this guy in over Steve Mongo McMichael. Well, there's a reason for that because we're not talking about him. He's in on a different committee. So if he gets in, that'll be because that committee voted him in, or that's a different conversation than like a London Fletcher or a Jerry Evans.
Yeah. I like the fact that you mentioned that, Rick, because those names, Mongo McMichael being one of them, that is a separate list that, has nothing to do with this. These 15 names, however they vote on these, does not affect the other names, like you mentioned. So I do like the fact that you mentioned that. That being said, boys, shall we get to a committeeing, I guess, is what we say. And don't worry, we will do a better job than some committees do in recent weeks. So there's that. All right, gentlemen, the first name on the list, I'm just going to go in order of the names as I saw them when I was writing them down. So if anyone wants to yell at me, yell at official websites, and they should order their lists differently. All right, let's go with it. Eric Allen is the first name that is going to be mentioned here, boys. 1988 second-round pick. He was the 30th pick. Played on the Eagles, Saints, and Raiders in his career. Had a pretty solid career for himself. 6-time Pro Bowler, 1-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time All-Pro second team, 3 pick sixes in 2 different seasons. I believe the only player to hold that distinction. And a very notable career highlight he had was a 94-yard pick six that he had against the Jets in 1993. Just one thing to note there. So that being said, Eric Allen, how do we feel about him? Are we putting him in at the moment, or are we going to go 2 out of 3? What say you, boys? I'll throw it to Rick first. Rick, you could get us going. Do you think he becomes a finalist? Yes or no?
My initial vote was yes, finalist.
Okay. Justin, what about you?
Agreed.
Okay. I'm with the both of you, actually. I think that's a pretty good resume, especially for a defensive back, at that point where I think, some of the competition he had to go up against in the 80s and 90s in terms of the elite wide receivers there were. He had to cover a number of guys throughout his career. 6 Pro Bowls, 3 total All-Pro teams. That's pretty good. And I think this will be a case that comes up as we go down the list where it's some people might be shocked because I think when you All-Pro team is the equivalent to the All-NBA team. I think it's the best comparison because All-MLB team just is only recently a thing. Why they didn't have that for longer, again, that could be its own conversation. But there's that. And there's also the All-NHL team, which we can also have conversations about that. I think the best comparison is to equate it to the All-NBA team in the NBA. And I think a lot of people, when they look at a lot of NBA Hall of Famers, and I know it's a little bit skewed because it's more the basketball Hall of Fame, whereas other accomplishments matter, versus this is the NFL Hall of Fame, where it's just strictly NFL. Your college football, your high school football, nothing else matters. It's all strictly about what did you do on the gridiron for the professional, football league, for the NFL.
Yeah, and I think, too, with Eric Allen, one of his cases is that his career started the latest of any of the guys that are on the semifinalist list. So when we were growing up watching football, we kind of saw the tail end of his career, really, if we remember much of it. But also, we weren't really watching Raiders games back in the late 90s. So you got to rely on the fact that their stats. And I think one stat that you left out there was that in his career, he had 54 interceptions. That means this guy was a ball hawk. And again, you talk about the great quarterbacks he was facing. How about the great receivers that he was facing? He was always in the AFC. So you're talking about, all the Denver Broncos, Rod Smith, the McCaffreys. You're talking about the Titans, and they're talking about like the Colts, Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, some of whom will be on this list too. The fact that if you saw him on that sideline and you couldn't throw the ball, and he was the reason why, I'm going to say this a lot, he's the forerunner for some of the guys that we're seeing in today's game. A lot of the guys crawled because Eric Allen walked, I think. So,
or wouldn't it be that they ran because he walked?
Sure, one of the, you know what I mean.
All right. Well, that being said, so Eric Allen, unanimous selection for us on this list. Let's go to another guy whose last name is Allen. So last name alphabetical order is how they did this list, so nobody can yell at me. Jared Allen of more modern era. So the 2004 fourth rounder, 126th overall pick. And I noted these down because I like the dichotomy of the guys who we will see that were first rounders and the guys who were picked later on in the draft, which for a couple of guys on this list were just undrafted as a whole as well. So there's that. It just goes to show that talent can be found anywhere. The Jared Allen spent his very illustrious career from 2004 to 2015 on a number of different teams, started his career with the Chiefs, continued his career is probably at the peak of his powers as a Minnesota Viking, which of the three of us here, particularly like growing up on seeing him at the peak of his powers in Minnesota. Chicago Bears 14-15 and the Carolina Panthers finishing off his career at 15, which I believe that means he was on that Panthers Super Bowl team that made a run, which he was an important part of that team. Don't let the age fool you. He was an important locker room leader there. Four-time member of the first team All-Pro team, five-time Pro Bowler. Twice he led the leagues in sacks. He actually has the most safeties of anyone in a career. This harkens back to the trivia we had weeks ago from Justin in terms of safety. So, it tied. Justin knew all along that this was coming clearly. And I mentioned this already, but yes, twice he led the league in sacks in his career. 136 career sacks for himself, 12th all time. Could have been a defensive player of the year in one of those Minnesota Vikings seasons, especially. I think he just lost it out. So I want to say it may have been James Harrison. It was either Harrison or Polamalu that ended up taking it away from him in one of those Viking seasons. But this was a guy who was consistently doesn't even begin to show. This man was a physical freak of nature. We can say that about a lot of these guys, but this man was a physical freak of nature for sure. He was an amazing individual player. He has the accolades. He was a good team player as well. Just likable, which I think I mentioned this because, as we've discussed in previous weeks, this can mean something, and it does mean something in certain Hall of Fames. But did the media like you? And I think for the most part, Jared Allen was liked by the media, but that's not to detract from anything. This dude was a beast. I'll start this off. He gets my Hall of Fame vote. I don't see any reason not to put this guy on the list. So, Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, there was few players that were as dominant as he was when it came to sacking the quarterback for that stretch of time. He's got to make it in my mind.
No argument from me here. Absolutely. He belongs in the conversation, and he should, if not this year, go into the Hall of Fame in years down the line. Because there's, as Justin said, there was no more dominant guy in the mid-2000s in Minnesota or in anywhere than this guy was. And, I mean, he was great. Great player. So, absolutely.
Yeah, there is that. All right, moving on. Willie Anderson, a offensive tackle, right tackle, the 10th overall pick in 1996 for himself. Spent nearly the entirety of his Hall of Fame career with the Cincinnati Bengals from 96 to 07. Played one final campaign in 2008 with the Baltimore Ravens. We will not hold that against him in any way, shape, or form. He was a four-time Pro Bowler in his career. Made it to 3 first-team All-Pros and 1 second-team All-Pro. This was an amazing thing I found when I was searching him up. There's actually a couple numbers just to support his case. So from 2006, in 2006, he actually only allowed 11 quarterback pressures for the entire season. And if you go from 06 to 2019, very recent season, that is the 4th fewest allowed QB pressures by an offensive tackle in that span of time. And I believe first team All-Pro, that was his first, the last of his first team All-Pros. And he actually was the first right tackle named to 3 straight first team All-Pros when he accomplished that feat in the mid-2000s. He was the first player to do that since the 1970s. So Willie Anderson, a critical part of Carson Palmer's early career success that he had on the Cincinnati Bengals, because, his career coincides with the eventual Carson Palmer reign, which, they may have never won, but there were some pretty good counting numbers there. And Willie Anderson, clearly his protection for the early parts of Palmer's career play a factor in that. So that being said, Rick, I'll throw it to you first. I think you're a pretty good arbiter on this. Where are we leaning with Willie Anderson on this one?
So I don't know where you're leaning on it per se, but I think this was a case where I looked at overall total body work, and it's really hard to rate offensive linemen in this round because they're not going to get a lot of stats here. Unfortunately for me, Willie Anderson did not make my metric. I don't think that he is a Hall of Famer yet, but I think that right now the problem is that there's just too much competition on other positions
Right.
to really warrant and merit Willie Anderson's consideration for my money. Again, great career with the Bengals and really helped, the maturation of Carson Palmer there, which is a huge win for him. But for me, it's a no for this year's Hall of Fame class.
That's fair. And again, this can always be a case depending on where me and Justin go, and depending on when we get to the very end of this list, we can always come back to some of these names that we didn't necessarily think, and we could, like, if we only have 14 definitives at the end of this, we circle back and see who were we close on and pick our last guy from there. But again, that's towards the end. Justin, where were you leaning with Willie Anderson here?
Well, it doesn't matter because Rick didn't pick him, right? No, listen, Willie Anderson is great. It's a great player. But I agree. I didn't have him yet, and maybe there's like a little bias because he's not like a big stat guy. It's hard to be a stat guy as an offensive lineman, but I just thought there were people that were higher on the list for me.
That's fair. I definitely would have considered putting him, and I think on like a rough draft of it, like, we have our first 25. Maybe if you have to take 5 guys out, get to your 20, then your 25. I think he certainly would have made that for me personally. We keep him off for now because he does have the 2 strikes. But if we get to the end of this list and there is something to consider, again, maybe we circle back. But I think pretty confidently we can say for now, Willie Anderson not there. But it's like you said, Rick, someone who maybe in future years, depending on what the strength of classes is, will get his just due because he was pretty good in his time. All right, this is another guy. It's going to be interesting the conjecture that it is, to say the very least, with this player. Tiki Barber, 1997 second rounder. He was the 36th overall pick. Spent his entire career with the New York Giants from 1997 to 2006. One-time member, first-team All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler. He didn't have a 1,000-yard season until the 4th season of his career, but he did finish 6 of his last 7 career seasons with 1,000+ just rushing yards. And the last 3 years of his career, he did go over 1,500 rushing yards. In 2004, he finished with 1,518. He went over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. In 2005, he finished with 1,860, nearly 2,400 all-purpose yards. And in 2006, he finished with 1,662, and again went over 2,000 total yards for himself. He had at the time, most 200-yard rushing games by a player over 30 still has it. Most 200-yard rushing games by a player over the age of 30. He had 4 of those past the age of 30. Only 3 other players have 1 to that point. And this is a guy who, got better actually as his career went on. Maybe that had to do with how early in his career he was seldomly used, but he had a pretty good finish, and he retired from the Giants just the season before they won the Super Bowl. And what a Super Bowl would have done for his career resume would have been something, to say the very least. Tiki Barber, I think, is a very interesting player when it comes to speaking of New York sports, to say the very least. He was a very individually talented player, but maybe someone that the media didn't necessarily like when he was at the peak of his powers in his career. Later on, I think a guy who maybe in future seasons, future Hall of Fame classes, I think maybe would get more of a look. But I just think, as you guys have mentioned, with the case of this class, I don't know if they'll be sending him in as a finalist. So I would tentatively say a no for that. So,
I believe this case has been buoyed by the fact that Rondé got into the Hall of Fame last year. Because while Tiki was, I think, a very good running back in his time, I don't know if I would classify him as an elite running back at that position in that given time. I think that, what I think will help him more, though, honestly, is I think his ambassadorial work, now that he's on commentary for games and now that he's in sports radio and he's a sports personality, I think he's trying to right those wrongs in a way. And I think that, I think you're right. I think he will eventually get further along. But I will say this. I think of the 3 first-time semifinalists, his case, I think, is the weakest of the 3. And we'll talk about the other 2 a little later when we go down the list. But, yeah, for me, I keep him out for now. I think that it's just it's not his time yet.
I agree. He's not a first ballot for me. It's going to take some waiting, I think, for Tiki Barber to make it in there.
All right, more than fair. Let's move on from Tiki Barber to a player that the 3 of us have certainly grown up on, because this name has definitely came up on previous trivia before for how good this guy was. Anquan Boldin, a second-round pick, 54th overall in the 2003 draft. Spent the first good amount of his career with the Arizona Cardinals from 03 to 09, then went to the Baltimore Ravens from 2009 to 2012, so stayed with the Birds there for a good bit. Went to the San Francisco 49ers for 3 seasons before vaguely finishing his career out with the Lions in 2016, and he was like on the Bills. I don't know if it was preseason or practice squad, whatever it was the case he was, but didn't really play in that 2017 season. 2016 was the last real time we saw him. Relatively interesting career for Anquan Boldin. I think the thing to describe Anquan Boldin, early on in his career, he was absolutely electric, as we mentioned here on the show before in trivia, but he had the record for the most receiving yards by a rookie in a debut with 217. He had tied Billy Smith for most yards from scrimmage in his first game, and he had the most receptions in the first 26 games of a player's career at that point, and he was at later on, a couple seasons later, he was the fastest 300 career receptions before it was eventually broken by Odell Beckham Jr. So this was a guy who early on in his career just absolutely electric, lightning in a bottle, and he was a performer, I think, when it mattered in the playoffs. In 15 career playoff games, he had 70 career receptions, 1,057 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. This was a guy who showed up when it mattered the most, and I think he was someone that his teams could rely on to just be a very, very steady veteran presence. That being said, again, Anquan Boldin, great player. I don't think, like, this is one of those cases where it's like, I think you hear this trope all the time when it comes to sports and like talk like this. There's the Hall of Fame, and there's the Hall of Very Good. I think Anquan Boldin is in the Hall of Very Good, or even pretty good. I don't know if he's going to make the Hall of Fame, and it may take so many years down the line in case it is. I got to say no with predicting that they would push him on. I don't think they'll push him on as one of the 15 finalists.
See, I disagree. I think that he's worthy, but I also have a caveat to this. If he is worthy, then he has to get voted in now. Because in 3 years, his teammate Larry Fitzgerald will become eligible. And if you have to compare Boldin to Fitzgerald, there's no comparison. So right now, he's kind of on that idea of he was electric, absolutely, for me. And I think that now is the right time to kind of consider him. Because once you have Fitzgerald come get eligible, he'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer in 2026, no question.
Right.
But if Boldin's still there, then it's always going to be a case of, well, but he wasn't as good as Larry Fitzgerald.
Right.
I think that in the realm of the wide receivers that are on this ballot, I think he's one of the better ones. So I had him in, but I'll put him. I do understand your case of Hall of Very Good versus Hall of Fame. So, but I thought he was a Hall of Famer for me. But I do understand what your case of Hall of Very Good.
I mean, he's definitely a Hall of Famer for me. He's not, you're right, he's not in the class of Larry Fitzgerald and all these top guys. But I think he's definitely a Hall of Famer. He's one of those guys that, like, unfortunately, a lot of his stats are lower than they should be purely because he missed a ton of games due to injury. He was one of those guys that was perpetually hurt. But, you know, that being said, he was the definition of quarterback proof.
Right.
No matter where he went, when he was on the field, he was electric. He was catching touchdowns. He was having big games. And he really was. It's just like when he was on the field, the picture of consistency.
Yeah.
Which is almost ironic to say. But yeah, in my mind, he's definitely a Hall of Famer. You're right. He's not the greatest of all time, but he's good enough to be recognized as a player that should go down in history.
That's, again, more than fair. I kind of base it off of, I don't think they'll put him in, but if you two want to, and again, this is why we'll have this conjecture at the end. Right now, we're 2 for 3 on him. So we'll come back to Anquan Boldin once we get to the end of our list. And if we got to put guys in, I'm more than willing to say, yeah, but we'll for sure put him in. So Anquan Boldin, the first player that we're just putting to the side that we will definitively come back to later. So we are 5 players in. Let's go to the next guy. Jari Evans of the predominantly New Orleans Saints time for his career. 2006 4th rounder, 108th overall, spent just about the entirety of his career with the New Orleans Saints. 2006 to 2015 was temporarily on Seattle for a very brief period of time before being back with the Saints in 16, and then finished with one final season with the Green Bay Packers. Super Bowl champion, of course, part of that New Orleans Saints team that really revived the Saints as a franchise and the city of New Orleans as a whole. Key part of that offensive line. that saw a lot of rushing success, really, and just all-purpose success in that time. We've talked about those Saints teams from the 2010s and just the absurd offensive stats that they were able to put up in just as a team. But yes, Super Bowl champion, 4-time first-team All-Pro member, 1-time second-team All-Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler, and I think this is a big one that I think would make a difference for a lot of these guys. Is he was a member of the NFL 2010s All-Decade team, where even if he doesn't get his just due now, the fact that he was named by the league as a member of an All-Decade team, meaning for a decade's worth of football, he was one of the most notable players of that time, one of the best guards in that time, I think will make a difference for him. Even if it's not now, maybe a year or two down the line. I'd be willing to put him in and say that he's going to be a finalist right now. I would want to wait to see what you two think, but I have no... You're not going to hear a complaint from me if we decide to make him our next unanimous player here, potentially. So,
Again, this is another guy that was fantastic in his time, but I don't know what it is about Jari Evans that doesn't scream out to me Hall of Famer over these guys, at least. I mean, we're going to come up on a couple of players soon.
Yeah.
That, I remember their names cemented as dominant, best all time, and just Jari Evans, it doesn't pop in this list to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also, again, it's because we don't see offensive linemen pad the stat sheet all the time. But this is a guy who played in the 183 games and started every single one of them, which for an offensive lineman is some consistency that is, dynamite. We don't see that a lot in offensive linemen nowadays. Mekhi Becton, stand up or sit back down. Don't hurt your ankle. But this is also a guy who was a 4th-round pick out of Bloomsburg. Not a big college for Division I, but he was a Division II stalwart because Bloomsburg was a very big program in D2. And something that David Baker, the former Hall of Fame commissioner, said when he was doing his, telling people that he was inducted, they were getting inducted, speaks out to me because he said, I want to thank you for all you've done for the game and all you're going to continue to do for the game. Well, last year, Jari Evans was an intern in the NFL's minority coaching programs at 40 years old. So he's kind of getting into that mode where he wants to give back to the game a lot more too. So I looked at him, but I also looked at him compared to Willie Anderson, which I know is a guard or a tackle, which is apples to oranges, but they're both on the O-line. So I kind of went in that realm. I put him in. I think that he has the consistency numbers to warrant it. I understand that there are guys that are on this list who are more electric, but you also have to think about it like this. Were it not for Jari Evans, Deuce McAllister wouldn't have been the guy that he was, running the ball, or Drew Brees wouldn't have been able to throw as many passing yards as he was without a guy like Jari Evans there. So I think I will say I'll put him in. I know it's kind of 1.5 out of 3 or 2 of 3, but I mean, I'll put him to the side because I think he's worthy. I would understand if he's not worthy yet, but I think that he is ultimately at some point down the line worthy for sure.
Yeah, and so again, now we have our second guy here where it's a 2 out of 3. We're going to continue going down the list, and we see at the end however many spaces we have left. Potentially he could be back in there. So yeah, 2 out of 3. I was going to make the joke, Rick, that the reason why Justin doesn't want to put him in is because he also went to Bloomsburg, and that just doesn't vibe to Justin. I think Justin has something against Bloomsburg.
Bloomsburg?
Yeah, Bloomsburg.
All right, that being said, let's get on to the next name here. London Fletcher, undrafted free agent out of 1998, spent the first 4 seasons of his career with the Rams, was part of the Super Bowl winning team. The greatest show on turf. He was on the defensive side, of course. London Fletcher, a linebacker for the people, in case we need to make that clear. But he was with the Rams to start his career, played with the Bills from 2002 to 2006, and we know how much the Bills valued him because then later on when he returned to watch a game, they just put him in the worst possible seats earlier this season. Do better, Buffalo, do better. But no, in all seriousness. And then he played with the Washington Redskins. Take out the D in that name. He played for the Redskins from 2007 to 2013. London Fletcher. We're talking about names here that, consistency, and you mentioned the 183 games for Jari Evans, Rick. London Fletcher was the model of consistency for himself. One of 5 players to play in over 250 consecutive games, and he has the record for most consecutive starts at the linebacker position with 215, well over 2,000 combined tackles in his career, only second behind Ray Lewis in terms of tackles. So this is a guy who, the consistency, some success individual-wise, has the Super Bowl ring from early in his career where he didn't necessarily become the London Fletcher we knew yet, but of course that consecutive start streak started when he was on the Rams. St. Louis variety, not the Los Angeles variety. So that being said, there's a guy I think you could go either way on. I see the argument for some people saying that there is so much there that in terms of accomplishments, in terms of durability and consistency, you put him in there. But I also see there's some people, which again, like I think this is why I mentioned the All-Pro stuff, because I think the NFL is a sport where a guy may not have made a lot of All-Pro teams, but he was better than what just those selections could have made. Think about, I mean, I just mentioned it. He played the same time as Ray Lewis. We knew Ray Lewis, and he was in the AFC for a chunk of that time. Ray Lewis was making a lot of AFC All-Pro teams, and All-Pro teams in the NFL. He was making a lot of Pro Bowls. So there's a guy who maybe his stats could have been better if he had gotten a little bit more lucky at the time. So you never know. Rick, I'll throw it to you first. London Fletcher, did he pass the test for you, yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. Without question in my mind, this is a player who belongs in the Hall of Fame. I mean, you're talking about one of the more premier tacklers of the mid 2000s, a guy who it didn't matter what team he was on, it didn't matter what their score was, didn't matter what the records were. He came to play every single time out. We'll see this a little later. A small school guy. John Carroll University is a big school in the D3 world, but it's not a big school in terms of regular college football trivia. So this is a guy who plied his craft, who paid his dues, who worked as hard as he could to get to that point. And again, when you're a guy who lasts only a few seasons in Washington and you're already put into the Ring of Honor and the 90 greatest of all time for that franchise, it speaks volumes to the fact that you brought a level of consistency to that team. So I had him in, and I thought it was a slam dunk. I mean, I thought he was an absolute Hall of Famer for me.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't blame you. I wouldn't disagree either. No.
Yeah.
There it is. I think that says it all. So,
Yep.
Yeah. So London Fletcher, boom, goes in. He is I think he's, correct me if I'm wrong, third guy. All right. So he is the third definitive name on the list. So we have 3 definitive yeses. 2 will come back to, and 2 no. All right. Let's continue on. This is going to be interesting. Like, there are still some older names. We're going to have a couple names here where we all grew up on, and I think a lot of people that have watched this definitely grew up on for sure. Let's go Dwight Freeney here, the 11th overall pick in the 2002 draft. Spent his career with the Colts predominantly from 2002 to 2012. Part some really good teams there. The San Diego Chargers from back in the day, from 13-14. He was temporarily on the Cardinals and temporarily on the Falcons, as well as Seahawks and Lions. This dude just went all over after the Colts cut him, which, I mean, to be fair, wasn't really against him. Ryan Grigson, we all know, not a good general manager, to say the very least. But in his career, a Super Bowl champion, 3-time first-team All-Pro, 1-time second-team All-Pro, 7-time Pro Bowler, led the NFL in sacks in 2004, forced fumbles co-leader in 2002. And again, I think this is a thing that matters, part of the NFL 2000s All-Decade team, which I think is going to end up, for a lot of these guys, whether it's this season or maybe in future seasons down the line, will matter, where it's like the league said, hey, this was one of the premier pass rushers in our league for this decade. And especially in the 2000s, he played the vast majority of it there. So there's that. He was the runner-up, actually, to Julius Peppers for Defensive Player of the Year voting one year, which that name will come up later. And he was also the Colts single season and franchise leader in sacks before he was surpassed in both of those categories by, again, someone we'll name a little bit later on in Robert Mathis. So that being said, what do we think about Dwight Freeney's case for the Hall of Fame? Are we unanimous on him, or is he going to be a 2 out of 3 for?
It's the more I thought about it with Dwight Freeney, the more I kind of didn't really know, because he started off his career so well, and then he dipped a little bit, and then he had a couple of renaissance seasons that were great. I think one year he had 16 sacks, and then towards the end he fell off a little bit again, and then he just continued to fall off towards the end. And it was almost like he hit a point where he peaked, and then the valley after that was just so deep that I didn't really. I went back and forth between him and Robert Mathis, to be honest with you, and so I'm very much on the fence with him, to be honest with you. I had him down initially as a yes, but the more I think about it, the more I'm kind of like, I don't know for sure. So I'm a tentative yes, but I will not fight if there's a disagreement. I will see the side of no.
That spin move, man.
You talk about a guy who developed something that today's generation uses. His spin move, a lot of college kids did study that.
Yeah.
But does the spin move get you in the Hall of Fame?
It was something watching that spin move go. I mean, it was unstoppable. And then when he came up with the spin move and then he had the spin fake where he would go to make the spin move and then come back, and it just, man, he was so good, and he was good on the best teams too.
Yeah,
I mean, when it was Robert Mathis and Dwight Freeney and Peyton Manning on the offensive side of the ball, and you were just like, what do we do to compete with a team like this?
Yeah.
He was so good. I mean, he did have that dip off, and I couldn't argue it if you wanted to say no, not this ballot, but I gotta say I would certainly pick him.
Right, I don't blame you, and also to Justin's point there, at the time, it's been surpassed by the Patriots since, and maybe who knows if the Chiefs are able to do that in the decade of the 2020s. But the Colts of the 2000s were the winningest decade in NFL history before they were surpassed by the Patriots. And for Freeney himself, just to mention it, in terms of guys that we talked about, a couple instances where these guys showed up when it mattered, 11 career sacks in the postseason, which ties him with a good chunk of names on the list. Just some of those names include Charles Haley, Clay Matthews, Lamar Woodley, and also James Harrison. So it's pretty good company, all things considered. This could be a case, and I'm willing to say this right now, we can continue to go down the list, and we can come back to Freeney, because, again, maybe there are just some names where we'll immediately check them off as no and yes, and we can save Freeney to the end if we feel that is more right. Because I can be either way with you guys, to where I'm with Justin, to where his impact that he made on good teams mattered so much. But to Rick's point, do you see the great first half of his career he had, and then you look at the second half where he began to taper off? What do you hold more so? So I'm more than willing to say let's tentatively put him for now, and then we come back to him after that. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
All right, let's move on from him. Let's do a little bit of a speed edition here with at least one of these guys for sure. Antonio Gates.
Check. Yes, move on.
There we go. I'll just say this for the sake of it so that people understand how great Antonio Gates was. 6-time total All-Pro teams, 8-time Pro Bowler, NFL 2000s All-Decade team. He became the 7th tight end at the time when he accomplished this with 500 career receptions. 9th player and 2nd tight end to catch 100-plus touchdowns in their career. Most career receiving touchdowns by a tight end. 17th all-time in catches, 31st in receiving yards, 7th in touchdowns. This dude didn't even play football in college. He didn't even play football in college. He was a basketball player, didn't like his prospects as a pro, went to some combines, and the rest was history from that moment on. And actually, relatively speaking, took over sort of right away in his career. He didn't have to wait long to become the Antonio Gates that we knew and would end up revering, because he was great for the Chargers from 2003 to 2018, just a model of consistency. I think it's funny because I think he was actually planning to retire before 2018, but they were able to coax him out for that season, and he still was able to contribute a little bit in terms of stats. So I'm with you, Rick. There's not much deliberation we need to have here. Antonio Gates is for sure a Hall of Fame.
Not even that, too. Let's also remember that he was an Elite 8 basketball player, because his senior year, Kent State made that run to the Final 8 of the March Madness with this guy as your low post blocker and scorer, a guy who would then get over 12,000 yards receiving. Come on. I'd take him in a fight.
Oh, man. So there's Antonio Gates being our 4th unanimous selection here of our 15. So we continue to move on. So of the Chaos Council, that's what I've been looking for. We are the Chaos Council for the voting. There we go. All right. Let's move on to the next name, which, again, I have a soft spot for this position, but probably not going to end up getting in here. Maybe. We'll see. Eddie George, 14th overall pick in 1996. From 1996 to 03, he played with the Houston/Tennessee Oilers/Titans. And from 96 to 03 before finishing off his career with the Cowboys in 04. Offensive Rookie of the Year in 1996, 4-time Pro Bowler, 2 times total to All-Pro teams, 1 first, 1 second. 2nd NFL running back to rush for 10,000 rear yards while never missing a start by the time that he had his 10K yards. And he started at one point in 130 consecutive regular season games, which is impressive when we have the conversations we have about running backs nowadays, and we compare to what it was in previous eras and times. Eddie George was a bit of an Iron Man, to say the very least. So Eddie George, definitely a guy who, I could see it being a back and forth. I'm not going to disagree with you if you say no necessarily, but I'm not going to disagree if you say yes. I think you could make the argument either way. And maybe we said about some of these guys, maybe this just isn't the ballot, or maybe is this an argument that Rick would say that this should be the year he goes into the ballot, all things depending. But we'll have that in a moment. Justin, what did you say about Eddie George? Is he one of your 15 moving on or no?
He is, and he's towards the bottom of my 15, but he's just so much fun to watch play. I mean, he's one of those guys that growing up, when you were playing football outside and you got the ball, you were like, I'm going to run like Eddie George. He had that impact on I guess kids like me at that point. So to me, he was worth throwing in there. Just maybe it's a bias personally.
I mean, I think it's tough to call it a bias when you have a player this talented. And again, a disclaimer: all 25 of these guys could be put in the Hall of Fame if we're being realistic. They potentially could be, but we know we have to deliberate this to a final 15, just like the voters are doing. So that's just to mention that. So Rick, I think you're kind of the decider here. Is he going to be in the Hall or not?
I had his jersey growing up too.
Really?
I did. Yeah, because there was a time back in the late '90s where I was looking for a secondary option, and the Titans were the new hot team that I was very interested in.
So you were always like a fake Jet fan.
No, I was a Jets fan growing up, but there was actually a flea market in Pennsylvania where I bought a Tennessee Titans toy truck, and then I loved Steve McNair and I loved Eddie George. That being said, though, I said no. I said no. Yes, he was a very fun running back to watch, and he was a very slick runner and very good at making the cuts. But at the same time, I don't know. To me, his candidacy is. I have a lot of questions with it. I mean, again, I felt with him, he was one of my final few cuts, like where Freedy was, I guess, my 14th guy in. George was like my second guy out, because there's the name that I left out that I think you're going to be shocked by a little later on. But I left him out, but I don't disagree about putting him in. I think that eventually he will, but I think also, the running back position, to me, there's a little more time for them. Whereas the wide receivers, you have a lot more electricity coming in. The running backs, to me, there's not a lot of guys, I think, coming down the pike that I would say, well, if Eddie George doesn't get it now, he's never going to get it. I think he will get it eventually, but I just don't think this is the year for him.
I don't blame you. I think this is one of those times where I look at it. I think on this ballot in particular, of the other running backs, I think he is probably the best of the running backs on it. So I think that I think if you compare him directly to his peers on this current ballot, I think he's the best of them. So I think first off, that's the thing that gives him. I gave him a very tentative yes, all things depending. So again, this is a guy we'll come back to here in moments for sure. But I think this definitively, excuse me, as I fix the settings here, he is for sure there. And I think this also, for me at least, this fully knocks out Willie Anderson and anything with T.T. Barber. So we're not even going to bother with those two. So Anquan Bolden, Jari Evans, Dwight Freeney, and Eddie George, 4 guys that we will come back to as we reach the end of this list eventually. And we have, 4 definitive names at this moment? Yep. So as we continue to move on, let's get to the next name. Are we all going to say James Harrison? Yes, just so we don't have to fear him ever coming after our lives at some point.
I'm terrified of him, regardless of if he comes out to me or not.
But James Harrison, 2002 undrafted free agent, multiple-time Super Bowl champion, 5 Pro Bowls. I mentioned before 11 career postseason sacks, which puts him up there with a couple of guys, including one of his, one of the guys on this list for Hall of Fame consideration. We know his Defensive Player of the Year award that he got, which that season he also led the league in forced fumbles, and we know that iconic pick 6 in the Super Bowl. He was a yes for me, but I wouldn't blame it if you guys would leave him off. But I think for me, he was a yes.
He's an absolute yes for me. Like that play in the Super Bowl is one of the ones you remember in lore, no matter how old you were.
Yep.
And the fact that he basically made the Steel Curtain 3.0 or whatever it was at that point, 10.0, whatever it was, I don't even know. But he was a nightmare matchup for everybody involved. So I think, again, the guy who worked hard, undrafted, paid his dues, plied his craft, deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Slam dunk for me.
And also a guy who was cut a couple times early in his career, went to play over in Europe. And when he was back with the Steelers in 2004, it was kind of like a last chance. Like, hey, this is your last shot here to really make something of it. And he took it and he ran with it. I mean, he's not a running back, so we can't say that. But he took it and he sacked the quarterback with it, right? With all that fire and with all that.
I just want to see on his Hall of Fame plaque, Rhyme Fire, so that we all know the NFL Europe existed.
Yes. Shout out to the NFL Europe. Justin, is this a 3 for 3 here?
All right. Yeah. I mean, again, it was a guy who was towards the bottom of my 15.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent player, and he was a guy that you always wanted to know where he was on the field. Absolutely. But you think of the Steelers, and how often was he the best player on their defense? He wasn't even Like they had Palomalu, they had all these guys there. And don't get me wrong, he was the center of it all because no matter what, every play had to go through him. But like, I don't know. I think of great Steelers defenders, and he's like, don't get me wrong, absolutely. I'm not saying he's not a Hall of Famer. He was a fantastic player consistently throughout his career. But I don't know. There's something that rubs me a little bit differently with James Harrison, and I hope he doesn't show up in my apartment.
We'll hear a knock at Justin's door here any minute. So as we go from James Harrison, let's continue with the Harrisons. No relation though. Rodney Harrison, 1994 draft, 5th rounder, 145th overall pick. Began his career with the Chargers from 94 to 02. Again, we talk about the talent the Chargers have had in their franchise. And then he finished his career off with the New England Patriots from 03 to 08. In terms of individual accolades, he had a couple, a handful of Pro Bowls, some All-Pro first teams. But 2 Super Bowl rings helped bolster his resume, and I think his impact in those 2 Super Bowls runs made a difference. So from the 2003 season going into the 04 playoff run, he intercepted both Steve McNair and Peyton Manning in the playoff run for New England, while also forcing a fumble along the way. But it was the 04 postseason or 04 regular season to the 05 playoff run that I think was the big deciding factor for why you can say his name on this list as a candidate and maybe even push him in. He had an interception on Peyton Manning when the Patriots faced the Colts. He had an 87-yard pick 6 against Ben Roethlisberger. And he had 2 interceptions against the Eagles in the Super Bowl. The second one came with 10 seconds left in the contest to definitively seal everything for the Patriots. They were probably going to win that game regardless, but still, he definitively sealed it with that play. And then he was an initial member of the 30 for 30 club, 30 interceptions, 30 career sacks, all-time leader in career Super Bowl tackles at that point. I think he might still be, if not, he's probably second or third. And then in 1997, he became the first player to score on an interception return, a fumble return, and a kickoff return in the same season. So some pretty good accolades there. I think Rodney Harrison is a guy that a lot of people maybe wouldn't necessarily put in the Hall immediately, but I think there's a strong argument. If you're talking about guys who showed up in the big moments, when the Patriots needed him to in those Super Bowl runs, he was a big difference. And I think you could argue he was one of, maybe not the heart and soul of that defense. Maybe you want to give that to someone else who was on those back-to-back championship teams. I think he was a massive factor as to why the Patriots were able to win those 2 Super Bowl runs and get the back-to-back. So what do you guys think with Rodney Harrison being a Hall of Famer? Yes or no?
I'm going to say yes, as long as you don't make me talk about the Patriots in a positive light.
We can move on and go to Rick. So yeah.
I said no.
Is this the one where we'd be shocked with?
No, there's one for a little further down the line here.
There's more?
yeah. There's another one.
No, I think Justin means wait. We have to talk about more names.
No, again, like comparison is the thief of joy in this sense. And while Rodney Harrison had a phenomenal career, to me there were 15 other names that I thought deserved a little bit more than he did. So I don't have him in now, but I do see him in as a finalist somewhere down the line and the Hall of Famer eventually. I just don't think this year's the year.
Right. I was kind of on that same wavelength with you. I think these 25 names are so good that I just barely have him off. I think he probably would have been – it's probably one of my last cuts in terms of just not making it. Yeah. I think, again, not this year, but in a future Hall of Fame class, we'll see that 2 playoff runs can make you a Hall of Famer. And if you're talking about playoff runs helping your case, Rodney Harrison deserves to be someone mentioned. But again, I probably don't think he's going to be up there to say the very least. Again, this specific season.
Yeah.
Again, probably Hall of Very Good this year. I don't know if he cracks the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So that being said, let's move on to a player who I definitely have some bias towards. I'm not even going to lie about that. Devin Hester, 2006 second rounder, 57th overall. Played with the Bears from 06 to 2013, the Falcons from 2014 to 2015, and then the Ravens and the Seahawks a bit in 2016. 4-time All-Pro team, 4-time Pro Bowler, 2-time kickoff return yards leader in this league, 2-time punt return yards leader in this league, 3-time special teams player of the year, NFL 2000s and 2010s All-Decade team, NFL 100th anniversary, opening kickoff in the Super Bowl, so many different return records. I don't care. This guy's in the Hall of Fame for me. You could say it's biased. I don't care. He's in the Hall of Fame for me.
This is such an interesting candidacy, though, because, like, other than the kick returns or the punt returns, what else did he do? You know, he wasn't the best receiver or running back there was with the
Oh,
Bears.
definitely not.
No,
Definitely not.
I also thought he was a quarterback at some point, but no, he was only an offensive guy. I had him in also because I think that it's such an interesting character. This to me is kind of like, and I'll make this comparison too for the next guy. This is like the closer in baseball. You know, they have one job, and if
Yep.
they do it really well, then you have to kind of give it to them. But here's why I'll say it's on the fence. Is Dante Hall a Hall of Famer? Because they were basically the same person in a way.
I think
Kevin
Hester was.
Hester was a
clears
slightly
him.
better, but Dante Hall did it first.
No, respectfully, I think like
I don't know.
if even if you did it first, if someone comes along and does it better than you, I think that's different. I think Hester took what Hall did,
Let's play this future scenario. If he's in the Hall, is Cordero Patterson going to be a Hall of Famer later on down the line?
I think potentially yes, he could be.
I don't know. This is the slippery slope here. I had him in as yes, and I think Justin's going to say no, and I think he's got some good points there. But this is one of those interesting candidacies where it's like, are we really going to have him be a Hall of Famer for returning the football? I don't know. To me, it's questionable.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was an important thing, and like I understand the push, but like, what impact did he have on his team? Did he make them dominant? I mean, really, the only thing you had to do was either punt the ball out of bounds or kick it through the end zone, and he's neutralized.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, like as good as he was and as exciting as it was to watch him on the field, he didn't make his team a playoff contender. He wasn't dominant in any other facet. Like, it just I can understand the argument for him to be a Hall of Famer, but he's never in my top 15.
Let me also
when you're listing the guys
Yep.
that have had these impact on the game the way they did, and the guys that I've left out already. I'm not putting Devin Hester above those guys.
So let me also say this too. He had the opening kickoff return for a touchdown in the Super Bowl. They didn't win the game. So I
It's not his
understand
fault.
that.
That's the quarterback's fault.
Well, you know, Rex Grossman.
Like, come on, let's.
I mean, first,
I'm not saying not, and he was so good. And you know what? Maybe it's his team's fault for not being able to incorporate him in better ways into the game. I mean, let's call it what it is. Maybe they didn't do a good job of getting him the ball. I mean, the greatest thing that Arthur Smith did was he found a way to get Cordero Patterson involved. He saw Cordero Patterson, even this late in his career, is a stud. He's a playmaker. Let's get him the ball.
Yeah.
All right. Well, while Justin ruins the fun, and we'll come back to Devin Hester later potentially. Let's move on to the
This
next
is
couple
the
names.
Hall of Fame, not the Hall of Very Good. And if it was a Hall of Fame just for returning kicks, he's the king. Put him up there.
Yeah.
Give him a crown and a throne. But this is the National Football Hall of Fame. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. So wait, I'm curious.
Level in my mind, it just wasn't.
I'm curious because I'm going to question you about another Patriot now. Is Matthew Slater in the Hall of Fame? Yes or no?
Ooh.
He was so good for so long.
He was.
And
So-
it kills me.
So Matthew Slater being so good for so long, I'm not going to argue that. Probably the best special teams player of the last however many years, for sure. We're talking about
Slater was
different
more
roles of
than
special
special teams, wasn't he?
No, you're talking about a guy who barely got use in his career with Hester. We're talking about a guy even more.
Maybe I'm
barely
thinking of someone else.
I think
but-
it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is also a guy, by the way, who's still in the league, Matthew Slater.
Oh yeah, he's.
Somehow.
I think he's
he's still in the league.
Do you think if Belichick is no longer with the Patriots, do you think Slater just retires?
Yes, I
Because I think the only reason he's there is to just play for Bill.
I agree.
So
I agree with that.
Matthew Slater, you deserve it. Just retire, bro. you deserve it. I'm not even saying that to disrespect him. You actually do deserve some retirement. God damn.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next name here. Torrey Holt. 8th overall pick in 1999. 1999 to 2008, he played with the Los Angeles Rams, which included the greatest show on turf. He played a single season with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Was trying to make the Patriots roster in 2010, but ultimately did not. Super Bowl champion, 7-time Pro Bowler, couple all-pro teams there. 2-time leading the league in receiving yards, 1 time in receptions, NFL 2000s all-decade team. He was pretty good. 6 straight seasons of 1,300 receiving yards. And Rick, you kind of mentioned here, I want to throw this to you first because you brought this up before. Is Torrey Holt one of these guys where if you think he doesn't get put in now, you think he's going to have to wait his turn because of the receiving talent? Because we still have a couple pretty good receivers to go here. And I'll say at least one of the receivers we're going to name here soon enough, I'm putting him ahead of Torrey Holt if we're like just going by position.
So this is kind of where this is what I call the Lee Smith principle, because for many, many years in baseball, Lee Smith held the record for most saves in a career. It was untouchable for years on years on years. Never stepped the Hall of Fame. Got 50% in his best year and never stepped further than that. He got into the Hall eventually in 2019 by the Veterans Committee. But before then, Trevor Hoffman got in. Mariano Rivera got in. So guys that came later that did it better but were closers because the value of Lee Smith was there. That to me is kind of thing. And look, Torrey Holt's been a semifinalist for 9 years. He's been a semifinalist every year since 2015. Like, eventually, at some point, you got to stop teasing the man. I put him in. I think that while his reception numbers were a little lower, I believe that he had a very good career, and I think it's worthy of consideration with the amount of yards that he had because he, like Isaac Bruce, made that Rams offense run. So I put him in, but again, I can understand if there's a question mark about it.
I agree. I would put him in. I think it's about time. He's had to wait long enough. He was such a contributing factor to such a good team that it's strange to me almost at this point that he hasn't made it in. I understand why, and I understand what Rick said. I think he's gotta be one of those guys now.
Yeah, I'm with you too. I think let's make him unanimous. Let's put him in. Let's put him in. So that makes it. Is that our 5th or 6th unanimous person? Is he sixth? All right. Let's move on. Let's go to the next name here on this list. This was a guy. We're talking about talent. Andre Johnson, 3rd overall pick in 2003. Majority of his career with the Texans before he spent both a year with the Colts and a year with the Titans. So he was making his way around the AFC South. I think he was trying one more season to play with the Jags, but probably not so. But no, in all seriousness, 4-time All-Pro member, 7-time Pro Bowler, 2 times lead the league in both receptions and 2 times lead the league in yards, 4 seasons of 100-plus receptions and 1,400 receiving yards in the same time. Good Lord. This dude was pretty good. And just barely outside the top 10 in both receptions and yards here, boys. 11th in receptions, 11th in yards. He was pretty good. Andre Johnson is a Hall of Famer to me.
Andre Johnson was a lot of fun to watch, and he was one of those guys that like you see like for stretches of time he dominated. Now, I don't think that he was the definition of quarterback proof like we brought up before, but I mean when he had someone to throw him the ball, he was lights out. Yeah, I'm all for it. I loved Andre Johnson. I loved watching him play.
I would argue the QB proof part because even though he had fine QBs, he never had a 2-time MVP. Or did he win it twice or one time? And he never had an MVP winner at quarterback like, when we just talked about Torrey Holt having. He never had an MVP like Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison had. He never had that. He had David Carr, who all you want to say, maybe he wasn't set up the best for most success in Houston. That was the case. Andre Johnson still put up numbers. And Matt Schaub, again, counting stats-wise, Matt Schaub had some good seasons. Did anyone ever consider him competing for any significant awards at any point in his career?
Well, no. The question is, did he have good seasons because he was throwing the ball to Andre Johnson?
And I think this is Andre Johnson to me is a guy who it's like I would say he's one of the cases where he made QBs look really good because Matt Schaub was a backup or a spot starter in Atlanta, and then he goes to Houston, and he has some pretty good seasons. It just so happened that Andre Johnson was there for all those good seasons. And then when Matt Schaub completely imploded, Andre Johnson was still there as a reliable threat to the young QBs they were trying to replace with. So,
yeah, can't argue against it.
I think Rick's about to argue against it. I can tell by that smirk.
I don't have a good basis for it, though. I really don't. But I did not have him in my finalists this year.
Okay.
I don't. He has all the numbers and all the metrics, but I think that in the realm of the guys that are still to come, there are a couple of names that I have over him just for one reason or another. I think you're right about the QB proof part, but I think the fact that he had most of his career on with the Texans kind of hurts him in a way, because while he was the best player that was there, they were never a team that really amounted to anything at the time that he was there. He's, without a question, the number one player in Texans history on the offensive side of the ball. I said that because J.J. Watt is going to come darting down my door very soon, if I didn't clarify that. But I don't see a reason to not put him in. For me, I just didn't have it.
Okay.
I didn't have it. And there's no legitimate reason for it. There really, before you said, there's no legitimate reason for it.
Well, we have 2 out of 3 on him, so we'll come back to him as we go through the list. So.
Just a quick question because of what you claimed. Are you taking Andre Johnson or DeAndre Hopkins?
Well, you're saying me or him?
I'm not saying Texans career. I'm just talking pure talent-wise. Because obviously Andre Johnson ended up playing in Houston for a lot longer than Hopkins did. But Hopkins is well on his way to a Hall of Fame career as well. He is even with 3 quarterbacks on the Titans this year, he's played pretty well.
Yeah, I think that is probably the best comparison between the two guys. And I think you're right. I think there's an argument to be made. I think if it were up to me, I would take Hopkins over Johnson, because while I feel like Andre Johnson was more of an over the top threat, Hopkins you could slot anywhere and he could make plays like that. So I think that kind of makes my argument there, is that I think that while he was one of the best wide receivers in the game, he was only really good in that one instance. He was a deep ball guy and maybe an over the top guy, but there were other guys here who were more versatile, I think, than him, I believe. So, but I will go back and watch the tape. I'll watch the all 22, as Robert Saleh says.
Rick, I'm surprised you didn't put him in just for punching Cortland Finnegan in the face. But anyways, let's move on.
I thought that would have been a for sure reason.
Well,
all right, really quick here, just a quick summary of the definitive names we have in. So Eric Allen, we have for sure going in. Jared Allen, we have for sure going in. We have London Fletcher as unanimous. We have Antonio Gates as unanimous. We have James Harrison as unanimous. And we have Torrey Holt as unanimous. So that's 6 guys so far. 9 more that we need to decide on. Let's see over these next couple names will they be getting in. Robert Mathis, 5th rounder in 2003, 138th overall. His entire career with the Colts, became the Colts both single season and franchise record holder in sacks, passing his aforementioned teammate on this list, Dwight Freeney. But in his own right, very good. Part of that Super Bowl winning team, of course, multiple-time first-team All-Pro, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3 times leading the NFL in forced fumbles in a season. Actually, the most career fumbles forced all time, and also 123 career sacks, which is good for just barely squeaking into the top 20, literally at 20 in the all-time rankings. Is Robert Mathis for sure in at this point, or are we going to have to come back and conjecture later on?
I'm going to say yes. And now, Dwight Freeney was the exciting player on that defense. You saw guys getting sacked when you were like, wow, when you were going off, it was Dwight Freeney. The best player on that defense was Robert Mathis, in my mind. He was so good. He was consistently in the backfield. He was, let's argue, he could be the reason that Dwight Freeney has the chance to make it to the Hall of Fame this year. And I know you could say it vice versa, but Robert Mathis was dominant in his career, and he was the best player on a very good defense.
I like Mathis's candidacy a lot more too, for the reasons that Justin said. I think that whereas Dwight Freeney gives me some pause, I think Mathis, there's no pause for me. I think he, the more I've gone back and looked and seen everything, the more I thought he was the best player on that team, on that defense. So the only thing that could have stopped the Colts, by the way, was a Mike Vanderjagt missed kick, and that happened. So.
Hey, I'm with you too. Continuing, Robert Mathis. Let's round it out 3 for 3, unanimous. He moves on for us. Let's go with another guy here who I think is going to be moving on very easily, to say the very least. 2nd overall pick in 2002, Julius Peppers.
Check it. Move it on.
Check it. Let's move on. I'll just say this:
Final 4 guys today, huh?
Oh yeah,
the Final 4 guys.
Yeah.
There's another player that made the Final 4.
Yep.
9-time Pro Bowler, 7-time All-Pro team. Rookie of the Year in 2002, Defense Rookie of the Year in 2002. And again, NFL 2000s and 2010s All-Decade Team. His consistency is absurd. 266 games played. That is the 6th most all-time by a defensive player, and 159.5 career sacks, 4th. When other Hall of Fame defensive players said that he will be going in, none of us in this world can disagree with that. Julius Peppers is going to make the Hall of Fame very much easily. For sure. So let's go with that. So I believe that brings us up to 8 unanimous selections between us. Will this man be the 9th? We'll wait and see. Steve Smith, a senior, the 3rd round pick from 2001, 74th overall. Well over a decade in his career to start off with the Carolina Panthers from 2001 to 2003. And then finished his career with 3 solid seasons in Baltimore from 2014 to 2016. The 2005 Comeback Player of the Year after a really tough injury the year before in 2004. In that 2005 season, not only did he win Comeback Player of the Year, not only did he make the Pro Bowl, not only did he make First Team All-Pro, he was the Triple Crown winner of receiving. Again, tying back to another trivia on the show. So Justin just knows all. He knew this episode was coming one day. 8th all-time in career receiving yards, 12th all-time in career catches, and more than 1,000 all-purpose yards in 11 different seasons in his career, and at least 1,900 all-purpose yards in 4 of his first 5 seasons of his career. Because very early on in his career, he was more of a threat on the return game. They actually didn't give him too many receptions until, well, definitively after his rookie and even sophomore season. It was more later on where they finally gave him more shots. Steve Smith Sr., dynamite offensive player, as the Sports Center commercial is. Incendiary is maybe the word with E that we would use to describe his team. Explosive as well, but incendiary is certainly the word. So, Justin, I'll throw this to you first, because I feel like I've been picking on Rick to start us off for a bit. Justin, is Steve Smith Sr. a Hall of Famer? Was he one of your final 15 names, yes or no?
Yeah, absolutely. He is just, again, the picture of consistency. He was, for as long as I can remember watching football, Steve Smith Sr. was dominating. And when he retired, it was almost a shock. I know he was starting to get a lot of injuries and things like that, but for a guy, especially a guy his size, to come out and then the way he talked trash and then he just did what he told you he was going to do and dominated game after game after game. It was just so much fun to watch. And to me, if Andre Johnson was getting in, Steve Smith Sr. is for sure getting it.
There we go.
Well, then, if Andre Johnson's not getting in from me, Steve Smith's not getting in from me either.
Really?
I'm a little stricter on my wide receivers, but let me put it to you like this: was Steve Smith ever the number 1 guy anywhere he went?
Yeah,
he was in Carolina. Yes.
No, Musa Muhammad was the number 1 guy in Carolina.
Oh, stop! He won the Triple Crown in 2005.
And in Baltimore, he went to Baltimore just after Torrey Smith had his huge breakout season.
Yeah,
so he was always
the number 1 guy there. Torrey Smith was the over the top guy.
Yeah, he was always like a Robin to the Batman in the sense. Like I don't disagree with the stats. I don't disagree with the metrics and the overall, but I just, to me, his candidacy isn't warranted for this year, because I just think that if we're gonna put in every wide receiver that's ever played ball really, really well in one season, then let's just do that. But I think there are, if I stack him against Torrey
he had
Holt,
11 career seasons were over 1,000 all-purpose yards,
and then 1,900 all-purpose in 4 of the first 5 seasons.
When
he wasn't a receiving weapon yet.
Yeah, I understand that, and I do. But again, my listing was like, if I put him in, I'm gonna knock out a guy like Jerry Evans, who I think deserves to have a little more consistency and a little more play. I think so much of this is down to the stats versus the overall total picture. And I think guys who have really good stats now, just they're not going to get in yet. Like, again, this is his 3rd year as a semifinalist. So he's going to be a semifinalist for a very long time, and he will get into the Hall of Fame. I just don't think this is the year for him. I think eventually, but I don't think it's this year.
Are we picking whether or not we think they're going to make it in, or whether or not you would pick him this year?
I think you could. It's kind of a mix of it. It's like,
because I'm not picking based on who I think that the committee's going to choose.
Mm-hmm.
But that's,
I set my 15. I set my 15 based upon if I would.
These are your 15 based on who you think should get in, or based on who you think will get in.
This is who, if I had a vote, who I would vote to go to the finalists. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. That's the same thing.
You're good. I mean, I think part of this we can say is prediction, because I mean, we're probably going to hit on a good amount of these names if we're being.
I would say so. I would hope so.
If we didn't get a single one, no, it's impossible.
No, Justin, there's 15 guys moving on. I think we're going to get a couple.
25.
Yeah, it's rough.
It's literally impossible for us to.
All right, but if we get the minimum, if we only get 5,
Oh,
Ugh.
is that on us or is that on the NFL committee? I think that's more on them.
I think it's more on them. Definitely
I
more
think
on
it's
them.
more on them. All right,
Definitely.
let's do a little bit of rapid fire here.
Yep.
And the reason I say that is because I said no to all three of these names that I'm about to mention here. And again, this is last name alphabetical order. I'm going with these names here real quick. Fred Taylor, Hines Ward, Ricky Waters. I was no on all three of them. None of those three made my final 15. Just for the people to have the context. Fred Taylor, 9th overall pick in 98, spent nearly his entire career with the Jags, went to the Patriots for 2 solemn seasons at the end. One-time Pro Bowler, one-time All-Pro team, over 1,100 yards, or 11,000 yards in his career, 17th all-time. And Ricky Waters as well, over 10K in his career, Super Bowl champ, 5-time Pro Bowler. I feel like we've mentioned him on the show before in terms of length and stuff. Didn't get, he scored 3 touchdowns in the Super Bowl, but didn't get it because, in that same Super Bowl, his quarterback threw for like 5. And then Hines Ward, 3rd round pick in 1998, 92nd overall, entire career with the Steelers, was around for the Super Bowl winning teams. Pro Bowl, over 12K receiving yards, pretty good. But again, like, I think this is one of those things where it's like, I'm not putting in every single wide receiver, Rick, but I think in the comparative ways, I think the wide receivers we've named so far, I would put above Hines Ward in the Hall of Fame. But that's just me. I strike out on all three of them. You two let me know. Are we also going 0 for 3 with them, or is there one of these guys that you two would strongly say we're going 2 out of 3 for now and we'll circle back to them?
I mean, if I had to pick one of them, I think I would pick Hines Ward. I mean, to me, he's the Mendoza line of Hall of Fame. I mean, he was so good. He was good in so many different ways. Statistically, he might not have been the best guy. That being said, he is statistically one of the best players to play. But, I mean, he did so much more than that. That being said, you're right. I mean, I'm not picking him over Andre Johnson. I'm not picking him over Torrey Holt. I'm just not. Even Anquan Bolden, when Anquan Bolden was healthy, I mean, he was a more dominant receiver in my mind than Hines Ward was. But Hines Ward, again, he's one of those guys that did everything. He was a major contributor to multiple Super Bowls there. He is I would say he's the worst player I would put in the Hall of Fame at receiver. If you didn't do better than Hines Ward, you're not a Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. But that being said, Hines Ward is a Hall of Famer. I don't know if I'm putting him in this year with the class that we have.
Yeah, he's the only name that I would have considered of the three. And I did say yes to him initially, but again, I think Justin hits the point right on. Like, Hines Ward's the benchmark for if you were a good wide receiver, you were better than Hines Ward. If you were not a good wide receiver, that's who you're looking to try and be better than, So
in terms of Hall of Fame, let's not just say
right. In terms of Hall of Fame, right. Braxton Berrios is looking up at Hines Ward. I'll put it that way.
A lot of people are.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
So I understand, and I will concede, and I will say no on him because I think you're right, and I think we'll have an argument about other guys. But for my money, I think that, like Justin said, I think he is a Hall of Famer, just not this year.
Yeah, and maybe he is, like Justin said, maybe he is the Mendoza line for wide receivers in terms of whether it's you have to compare with the stats or level of dominance in a certain stretch of time. I think it's probably not too bad of a benchmark there, to say the very least. All right, let's move on. We have 4 names left to quickly look over here before we name the final 15 here from the Council of Chaos. Reggie Wayne, 30th overall pick in 2001, entire career with the Colts, Super Bowl champion, 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro team, led the NFL in yards in 2007, 10th all-time in receiving yards, and 10th all-time in reception. So just keeping Andre Johnson from both of those because he was 11th on both. He's also the Colts all-time leader in games played, where you talk about consistency for a wide receiver as well. In an era where there was still plenty of headhunting happening if in the middle of the field, Reggie Wayne stayed pretty healthy, to say the least. And he was still pretty good along those lines. I want to throw this to Rick first because I'm interested to hear this response. So, Rick, Reggie Wayne, did he make it into your final 15, yes or no?
Hold on, I'm looking to see if Vontaze Burfict is still sending Reggie Wayne any holiday baskets for not. Look, he has a very compelling case. I think Reggie Wayne does, and I put him in my final 15. I did. I think that when you talk about the Colts offense and the Colts of the 2000s, and it's interesting to me that a lot of this list is littered with, well, it's 3 guys, but still, it's Freeney, Mathis, and Reggie Wayne. You throw in all the rest of the guys that were on those teams, the Edgerrin Jameses, the Peyton Mannings, Dallas Clark even. Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison were you looked at one side of the field, you said, okay, let's throw everybody at Marvin Harrison. Then look at the other side of the field, it's like Reggie Wayne. Oh, wait. No, we can't. Reggie Wayne, while he was unassuming, was one of the more feared guys, I think. One of the more feared number 2 wide receivers out there. So I respected that, and I think that he deserves a candidacy, a finalist candidacy. So I had him in my final 15. Yeah,
Justin,
I agree. I mean, it's one of those guys where when you think of Peyton Manning, you think of Reggie Wayne. You think of Marvin Harrison, and you think of Reggie Wayne. He's got to be. He's got to be a finalist in my mind.
I love the
wide guy on that team, Austin Collie.
Austin Collie, yes.
Look, I love my wide receivers. Reggie Wayne's in mine as well. He was for sure there. All right, Vince Wilfork, 21st overall pick in 2004. Played with the Patriots from 04 to 2014, and then 2 seasons with the Texans. 2-time Super Bowl champion, 5-time Pro Bowler, and a couple All-Pro teams as well. I think this is interesting because the argument you just made, Rick, about those 2000s Colts and how many of those guys made the Hall of Fame. And I think we're going to be able to say a very similar thing with these 2010s Patriots, where it's Brady, right? Or even both eras of the Patriots, because he came in at the very end of the first era. He was on the Super Bowl team that beat the Eagles, and then he was on the first Super Bowl winning team of the latter part of Brady. So I actually think I read he was the only player aside from Brady to have been at least one in both eras of Patriot winning Super Bowls. So just to give that reference.
Yeah.
I think with Wilfork, the disconnect for me with him, and I'll just say this right now, he's not in my Hall of Fame. He was not in my final 15. I think he was a fine player. I think he was a pretty good player. I don't think he screamed Hall of Famer definitively. I think this is one of those things we haven't really mentioned is like with Hall of Fame, yes or no, litmus test. Do I immediately say yes to them? That's one of my first things. And then after some consideration, can you definitively switch me to, because I think there's some players, as we made the arguments here, we could say, you know what, you changed my mind. This is a yes for me.
Yeah.
I don't think Vince Wilfork would change my mind on that either, especially in this class, especially with the stacked talent that there is. And again, because he's won, because he was model of consistency, he's there. But I also think, and I don't know if you hold who his teammates were against him, but he played along the same defensive line for a good couple seasons at least with Richard Seymour. I know Richard Seymour is in the Hall of Fame. I think Richard Seymour, there's a little bit of different style between the two of them in terms of their consistency and what their role were on the Patriots. Vince Wilfork just misses out for me.
Yeah, so I had to get over the fact that I was a Jets fan when Vince Wilfork was destroying things. I had to kind of look at this objectively. So I had him as a no, but I will kind of give you a thought here. I would argue that Dwight Freeney and Vince Wilfork evolved their positions to where they are today. Right. I understand Richard Seymour, your point about him, and I agree. But I think that Vince Wilfork changed the way we look at nose tackles and interior defensive linemen. Like the way Dwight Freeney changed the way the DNs do that spin move or the spin fake or the swim dodge, all of that. I think you can argue that the innovations that those guys have and just the way that they played changed how those positions operate. And so there is consideration for that. But like you put it perfectly. If I'm looking at Richard Seymour or Vince Wilfork, I'm saying one of these guys has to go into the Hall. 100 times out of 100, I'm taking Seymour over Wilfork. He's a great player. He's now that he's out of the league, I respect his candidacy a lot more, and I think that
different positions though. It's hard to compare the two. No,
I understand that, but my point is that if I look at that entire line, I think Seymour did a lot more than Wilfork did, and as I said, good player. Great ambassador for the league, but I don't think he's a Hall of Fame caliber player.
At least not this year.
No.
Let me just say this. These defensive players on the Patriots do not have the stats that they have without Vince Wilfork there. I mean, I have never seen, and I don't want to do this, but as a Jets fan,
you don't want to praise the Patriot,
but I've never seen a 300+ pound man move the way that Vince Wilfork just dominated the center of offensive lines, just ate up offensive linemen, just blocked holes, and then he still had the presence to get after the quarterback. I mean, I have images of that I don't want and burned into my mind of Vince Wilfork coming into the center of an offensive line and just doing this. and guys fall and guys struggle. And guess what? When a running back is there, they ran right into that big 300-pound belly, and Vince Wilfork took him down. When a quarterback didn't know where to go, they saw Vince Wilfork, and the sides closed in on them.
Yep.
Vince Wilfork was not a stat guy, as many interior defensive players do. And that's why you're going to have people struggle with whether or not Vince Wilfork should be a Hall of Famer. But I guarantee you, if you ask people on that Patriots team, if you ask Bill Belichick, and you say, why did we get so many sacks this year? It's because Vince Wilfork spent 30-40% of the snaps occupying offensive linemen. You had to scheme to block Vince Wilfork.
Yeah. I thought for a second you were going to say he spent 30 years on the Patriots. It probably did feel like it.
No.
Actually, to be fair, if you were to ask Belichick about Vince Wilfork, he'd say, we're on to Kansas City.
That's true.
Yes.
But he wasn't a stat guy. You're not going to see his name in the record books. You're not going to see his name on the stat sheets. You're not going to see his name in lights. But that guy knew how to play the game in the trenches. And I hated every single game I played against him.
Yeah.
I did. He made me angry watching every time. And you know what?
Angry because he was so good.
Yeah. Probably part of it's probably jealousy. And you'll never hear me speak as kindly as you are about a Patriots stalwart. Maybe Gronk. Because Gronk will also be a surefire Hall of Famer.
Okay.
But he is a Hall of Famer.
Hey, again, absolutely. I think as we're approaching the end of the list here, we do need to add a couple more names here at the end because we didn't get 15 unanimous. I'd say even though as of now we're 2-1, I think we can very much go back to Wilfork once we go through the rest of the names, right?
Yeah.
So let's just go through these last two before we go. All right, Patrick Willis, 11th overall pick in 07. Yeah, check. For me, it's there's no argument needed to be said.
This is a guy who, this is the Barry Sanders. He retired at the top of his career and he left you wanting more.
Yep. He could have played 3-4 more seasons of all-pro caliber ball.
Yep. He only played 7 years.
Yeah. He was a monster.
He was so good.
Yeah.
He was a Pro Bowler every year.
Yep.
In the fully, because he did have the one season where he only played the 6 games. But every other year he was 7-time Pro Bowls, 5-time All-Pro first team, 1-time All-Pro second team, which, by the way, I was reading it. That All-Pro second team, he lost out by I think 1 or 2 votes to making the first team. That's how close this dude nearly went perfect in his career in terms of when he was All-Pro, he was the best linebacker in football. And I think he probably still was. Led the league in tackles twice, 2010's All-Decade team. Oh, again, we mentioned him before, not in a trivia, but in a would you rather between him and a guy who will make the Hall of Fame, we believe, in Luke Kuechly. 2 guys. And again, Patrick Willis,
similar career.
Yeah. Only 2 things missing from Patrick Willis that if he had it, forget just being bona fide A1, would have been first ballot and would have made him the one of the best linebackers of all time. We're talking about a Defensive Player of the Year award on his resume and a Super Bowl. If he has either or even both of these on his resume, we already respect his greatness. If he has either or even both of those on his resume, that's it. And by the way, he was the guy on that Super Bowl team that made it for the Niners. And it took years for this team to recover after they lost him early. It took years for them to get to where they are now between Warner and Greenlaw. So there's that. All right, last guy on this list before we circle back around, boys. Darren Woodson. Quick yes or no on his status, do you think?
I had him as a yes.
Me too.
Yeah. This is another guy who's been on the semifinal list way too long. But also, this is where it's a comparison. I compared him to Rodney Harrison, and I was like, who of these 2 guys
would you put in?
Or would fear me the most as a quarterback trying to throw the ball deep down the field? And Harrison, you mentioned it, in the big moments was the guy, but Woodson on every down was the guy. So that's why I put him in over Harrison.
He's also, I throw it to you guys first. He is also unanimous for me because he spent his entire career with Dallas. And I think that impact of him being one of the stalwarts for all 3 of those Super Bowl victories mattered. And I think Jerry, you talk about Justin saying how would Bill Belichick would say, Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson as well would both, I bet you, would praise how much they valued what Darren Woodson brought to the Dallas Cowboys.
Would Barry
during
Switzer say the same thing? Is my question.
Do we care
know.
what Barry Switzer would say, though?
I don't know if he would. I'm very interested to hear what Barry Switzer has to say about everything.
So we have gone through, my bad, but we have gone through all 25 names now. So real quick, let's just go through who our for sure unanimous ones were so we know how many we have left. So Eric Allen, unanimous. Jared Allen, unanimous. London Fletcher, unanimous.
Mhm.
Antonio Gates, unanimous. James Harrison, unanimous. So that's 5. We're going by 5s here. Torrey Holt, unanimous. Robert Mathis, unanimous. Julius Peppers, unanimous. Scroll down. Reggie Wayne, unanimous. Patrick Willis, unanimous. And Darren Woodson, unanimous. So that's, if my
11.
mental mark scheme is correct, that is 11. So let's go back to the names that we listed here as potential real quick. And let's re-go the list of, like, now that we know all 25 names and who we have left over when we've gone 2 out of 3. Anquan Bolden, now that we know the other names, would he be in between the rest of the names we have? Or actually, let's just go through who did we have of our 4 out of 5s. Or 2 out of 3s, excuse me. Anquan Bolden, Jari Evans, Dwight Freeney, Eddie George, Devin Hester, Andre Johnson, Steve Smith Sr., and
Rodney Harrison, I thought was a 2 out of 3 because I said no for him.
I think I said no.
You did?
Yeah, I said no. I said
okay.
He had a good run, but I just barely put him as a no.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then, that's it. Those are the 7 guys. Then.
But again, I think it's. I will stick to what Dustin said. Let's put Vince Wilfork there as well.
Yeah. Okay. I agree.
So of those 8, let's run back that list real quick and see, would we consider changing from a 2 out of 3 to a definitive 3 out of 3? So Anquan Bolden, would we change it? I don't know. If we have Andre Johnson at a 2 out of 3, if we need to only put one more wide receiver, I'm picking Andre Johnson over Anquan Bolden.
Over Steve Smith?
I thought we went perfect. Oh, no, Steve Smith. God dang it.
You ruined it.
No. But I still would say, between Anquan Bolden, Steve Smith, Andre Johnson, if we have to eliminate one of those 3 right now,
you know what? I'll change my vote to a no for Bolden if we're going with those.
Out of those 3, I agree.
Yeah, out of those 3, I think Bolden's the Bolden's the odd man out for that.
All right. So
if we injury,
yeah.
If we want real quick, let me run through the names again, and then we will say like immediately which one do we change to a perfect 3 out of 3 right now. So Jari Evans, Dwight Freeney, Eddie George, Devin Hester. I will relent. I will say no Devin Hester, Justin. So we could take him out.
Yeah.
So what? That's George, Evans, Freeney, right?
Yep.
Andre Johnson.
Yep.
Steve Smith Sr. and
Wilfork.
So that's 6. We need to pick 4 out of those 6. Is there anyone we would want to eliminate out of those 6 on paper right now?
I just don't think, and I already said no to him, but I just don't think that Eddie George or any of these running backs warrant consideration in this year's class.
Yeah, Eddie George was biased, I think, on my part. Like I said, I just loved watching him play growing up. I don't even know. Could you really put him over Tiki Barber?
I think that's the thing.
I think. Well, here's the thing. I think over Barber.
Yeah,
I think over Barber. Yes, I think Eddie George is the best of these running backs on this list. But now it's not running backs anymore. It's the other 5 names next to him at this moment. Would we put Eddie George above any of the other 5 names? And
so I picked 4 guys before Eddie George.
Exactly.
Yeah, so look, I will, since I was the holdout, I will acquiesce Andre Johnson and Steve Smith.
Okay.
I will say both. I after listening to your discussions and your points, I will acquiesce to that. That gets us to, I believe, 13.
Yes.
And so now we're down to Evans, Freeney, and Wilfork for 2 spots.
So now what we need to decide, which of those 2 are we taking out? Well, now, in theory, the one we need to overcome the most is Wilfork, because we had 2 out of 3 no, but would we change our minds after Justin's beautiful diatribe?
Well, so this is kind of where this is kind of where I'm thinking about this for a second.
Before we do that, though, since I was the holdout on Evans, I do think we should probably have some offensive line representation. And again, the way Rick has spoke about him being the Iron Man that he is, I would probably concede on Evans. I would put him in my top 15.
Okay. Yeah. So now it's Freeney or Wilfork.
Yeah, just before we got people out.
Just two really good guys.
Just before Rick talks, I'm going to keep interrupting.
That's okay.
Okay.
Let
me just interrupt one more time.
Of course you will.
Okay, yeah, I got you.
Okay.
Well, wait, I forget which one of us was the no for Freeney.
For Freeney, I think it was Rick, right?
Yeah, it was me.
And then it's both of us for Will.
Well, so my no for Freeney was a yes to Mathis.
Right.
Yeah.
So
hold on real quick because I want to put this on Rick. I will say yes to Will Fork right now, so it's on you, Rick. You are the last one to decide for the Council of Chaos.
Look. A man needs to know when he has given an incorrect opinion and when he has, been swayed. And Justin has swayed me on this candidacy here.
Which one? Because I actually gave a pretty good speech for both of them.
You did. You
Yeah.
did. However, I believe that, and this is me building up tension because you did both, so it's tension.
So now we actually don't know which one.
Exactly.
We've interrupted him so much; he's building tension.
I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Who am I at this point?
He still has a rain podium after this.
I will concede that Justin made a very good point, and I will, against my better judgment and against what I think is the wrong thing to do here, but I'm going to do it. Vince Wilfork moves on.
Oh,
I'll move Vince Wilfork on. Absolutely, I'll do it.
I put a Patriot in the Hall of Fame.
How dare you?
Oh man, it's actually funny if
either
Rick or I had different opinions on Rodney Harrison, you would have helped put 2 Patriots in the Hall of Fame. All right, so the final verdict via the Council of Chaos. These are our 15 guys who we believe would move on from being semifinalists to finalists on the potential of the Hall of Fame ballot. Eric Allen, Jared Allen, Jari Evans, London Fletcher, Antonio Gates, James Harrison, Torrey Holt, Andre Johnson, Robert Mathis, Julius Peppers, Steve Smith Sr., which were all alphabetical, by the way, so that was quite the run.
It's great, yeah.
Reggie Wayne, Vince Wilfork, Patrick Willis, Darren Woodson. Those are the 15 guys that the Council of Chaos has agreed upon moving on to the final 15 to potentially go in. And once we do know who the final 15 are in real life, wordplay, once we know who the actual list is when that gets announced, we will do an episode where we don't rely on each other. We would pick our personal. How many votes did we get on that? 10, Rick? Or
so it's not a certain number. What it is that like you have to have an 80% for the actual committee voting, an 80%
on the
majority,
ballot.
Yes, on the ballot.
But I just figured like you can't put all 15 guys. I figured there was like a minimum or a max that they could put. That's why I asked.
I think it goes down to 10 from there. Let me just because I believe you're right. I believe it goes from 15 down to further from there. So yeah, it goes down at the meeting. It will go down 15 to 10,
yes, and
then 10 to 5 of the modern, and then the remaining 5 finalists we voted on individually, yes or no. And they've got to get 80% of the vote in order to be a Hall of Famer.
Well, that being said, once we get closer, longer in the aspect, maybe we'll take the first, like these 15 that are put, and then we put our own personal number of guys in there because it's going to be there's some pretty good names here that we've decided to dissect to the very least. But that is what the Council of Chaos has decided upon. The council will reconvene in future matters when it comes to Hall of Fame of these players, and maybe the Hall of Fame candidacy on modern players in a future fun off-season episode, to say the very least. But with that being said, that handles the bulk of the episode. We know it's been a long one, ladies and gentlemen. We thank you for joining us on this one. One final segment to end the show. You know him. You love him. It's Rant and Rick's Rostrum Podium. The Podfather has people, things, places. Countries are not barred from this. Ideas, concepts, whatever falls under the sun, the Podfather can and will rant about it. Rick, take us home.
I have a large production to do next week, and so this is not going to be my greatest of rants, but there are things that I think need to be discussed that warrant ranting about. And I have an honorable mention for this list for one of the first times in a very long time. My honorable mention for this is the Detroit Pistons. How are you so terrible at basketball that you lost 20 games in a row, or 21 games now in a row it is? Like, I don't know. Joe Dumars is crying somewhere in a corner, and Rasheed Wallace is fighting somebody because he just has to think he has to do that for some reason. it's bad. Like the Spurs got a win last night, which is good for them, but like the Pistons could literally end up with single-digit wins this year, and they still wouldn't get the number 1 overall pick because of the damn lottery. I think if they're so terrible, just give them the number 1 overall pick. Let them have. I don't even know who the number 1 overall pick is this year. It's some French guy or something like that. France. Anyways, number 3 on this list. They're coming to the East Coast. Apparently, they are coming to the East Coast from East Asia, traveling by hundreds of miles, swinging on their webs. I'm talking about the parachuting Joro spiders. These things are large and hideous and ugly, and I just want to know one thing. Which one of you yokels rolled the dice in Jumanji, and this is what we get now? Like, come on now. Really? What's next? The giant herd of elephants? Like, why? Like, what? We had the lantern flies, and now we have this. I feel like I'm in side talk. We had de Blasio, we had Cuomo, and it was terrible, and now the Knicks are back. Well, now we have the spiders. It's great. Awesome. This is just makes my whole week that we have these spiders that are just running rampant on everybody. Number 2, there are, as I mentioned in the past, this is a retread of something in the past that has come back to fruition here. There are companies that are not staying in their lane. Like Dunkin' didn't stay in their lane when they made the box of chocolates. IHOP, thank you, Taylor Swift. IHOP is making pancake tacos now. And there is actually a company that's also making a Doritos flavored liquor. Like, I did not know that I wanted Cool Ranch in my tequila. I didn't know I wanted that in my life. I didn't know that I wanted a chocolate flappy flapjack serving as the taco shell for my morning breakfast of delight here. Like, stay in the lane that you're in, and let's call it a day from there. And then number 1, Don Garber. I used to rave about how Don Garber, the commissioner of Major League Soccer, was the best of the Big 4 commissioners. And yes, I know that soccer wasn't a Big 4 sport. But what's just happened with the MLS and the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup can only be described as an absolute farce. Essentially, this came down a couple days ago that Major League Soccer will no longer send its top teams to the U.S. Open Cup, into the Premier League competition of the United States, because of revenue sharing or critical monetary investments in the cup itself. So essentially what he's done is he's robbed us of the scene that we saw a couple nights ago in France, where I don't know if you saw this on Twitter. If you haven't, go take a look. US Revel, which is a 6th league side in France, a side that is made up of amateurs and semi-pro guys who in no way, shape, or form play soccer full time. They work as steel workers or, lumberjacks, and they play soccer at semi-pro level. They've made it to a point in their National League Cup where they will be hosting Paris Saint-Germain. And the emotions that they showed when that announcement was made was euphoric. Are they going to get destroyed? Probably. Maybe. But it means something to them. It meant something to Marine AFC, the 8th league side that got to play Tottenham in the FA Cup a couple years ago. So you have robbed basically Lansdowne Yonkers FC, a team of gritty, semi-pro players, the opportunity to play against NYCFC in Yankee Stadium is what you've done here. Or host NYCFC on your home ground for the reason of capitalism and money. I'm sorry. You're a guy who's pushing for relegation and is pushing for expansion when you have 30 teams in your league, and you're saying this? Don't forget your roots. Or should I say, don't forget the Tampa Bay Mutiny, who you contracted from your league all those years ago. I have a very, very hard time believing this. And I'm going to say this because you're the second commissioner. Bring back Doug Logan, the first commissioner, because this is just the worst thing you could have done. I'm sorry. I want to see that story of that 5th league side that makes it all the way because they beat a top-tier team. I don't care about MLS Next Pro. Who cares about the second-tier teams? Without the top tier, this cup is nothing now. So good on you for ruining something that I like Adam Rank. Good on you for ruining the Bears fandom that I like so much. Terrible. Next week, Rantsmas Express. May God have mercy on all our souls. Chugga chugga choo choo.
Rancemas Express indeed, just in time for the holiday season. The Rancemas Express is here for the people. That's going to do it this week on this edition of the Sports Angels of Chaos podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Quite the big episode, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't really expect that, but the pick challenge to start things off, the Brennan Staley talk, and then the Hall of Fame finalists made by the Council of Chaos that we have decided on. Very much more to wait and see on that in the future. But in the short term, a couple weeks left in this NFL season. The first game of this Saturday slate has kicked off over the last hour as we've been talking about this. So, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the rest of your Saturday with football. Enjoy your Sunday with football. And be sure to check back on next week's program, as it will be us talking a little bit of football, having some fun, but more importantly, the chaos of the Rancemas Express. Oh, we cannot wait. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you guys next week for the holiday special. Take care.